Okay, look at folks come in. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. Those who are with us on Zoom and joining us through the Cal EPA webcast. My name is Sarah Rubin. I am with the California Department of Conservation. I am a mediator and meeting facilitator. I am your moderator or host for the afternoon session of our conference, Online Environmental Engagement, Building Our Skills Together. This is officially what we're calling our 6th session over 3 days. And this is going to last from now 12:30 till 5. We're very excited to have you with us. The first thing I want to mention, especially if you are new to joining us, is that our whole conference has simultaneous Spanish interpretation. And we encourage you, if you haven't checked out that feature, to actually try it yourself. Even if you're monolingual English, you can hover your mouse over this little box that says interpretation on your screen and just take a moment, even 15 seconds, and hear what it's like to listen to our interpreter providing the Spanish interpretation. If anybody has any challenges, we encourage you to use our email, engagewithus2020@gmail.com. For those of you who are with us through the webcast, please use the engagewithus2020@gmail.com email to send questions in. In this Lunch and Learn, we actually aren't going to have time for questions, but in general. So here we are. Here is what we're doing for the next 45 minutes or so. It's very ambitious. I was thinking, in preparing for today, I was thinking about different colleagues I've worked with, and how they're always saying to me, like, really, you want to do that? Like, that's really ambitious, Sarah. And I'm always like, yeah, let's try it. So it kind of reminds me of Sherry from Participatory Budgeting. She's like, yeah, let's try it. So we're asking these people who could do at least an hour or a whole day workshop on the resources that they have available for free to you to instead do that in 3 minutes. I'm also asking them to not talk too fast because we're doing Spanish interpretation. So, and we gotta stay on time because we have our next session at 1:30. That's why it's very ambitious, and I'm gonna keep going. So here is who we have. We want to make sure you have your packet with you so you can check out their bios. Every one of these people is amazing. So from the National Coalition for Dialogue and Deliberation, we have Kiva Hummel. From the International Association for Public Participation, we have Natalia Henschel. From the National Civic League, we have Doug Linkhart. From Participedia, we have Patrick Scully. From the Divided Communities Project, we have Carl Smallwood. From the Local Government Commission, we have Danielle Dolan. And from the Institute for Local Government, where I used to work, we have Erica Manuel. Welcome. Thank you for being here. All right, I'm getting my timer out, everybody. And in the spirit of being very high tech, I have these 2 signs to hold up, okay, to give you a sense of things. So for some folks, I'm going to go through their slides for them, and then for other folks, they're going to take over and do the slides themselves. Okay, Kiva, are you ready? I'm going on mute. It's all you. Unmute yourself.
All right. Thank you so much, Sarah. It is a pleasure to be here with you all. My name is Kiva Hummel, and I'm the Communications Coordinator with the National Coalition for Dialogue and Deliberation, or NCDD. NCDD is a network of innovators who work to bring people together across divides to tackle today's toughest challenges. Our membership is made up of over 700 individuals and organizations, both in the US and beyond, working under this really wide umbrella of dialogue, deliberation, and public engagement work. And if you'll slide on over, thank you. Now, NCDD serves as a gathering place, a resource center, a news source, and a facilitative leader for this extraordinary community. Our mission is to bring people together to support relationships, organizations, and resources in ways that help to expand the power of discussion to benefit society. Now, what we have on our screen here, this is screenshots from the NCDD site. I translated this via Google Translate, so do apologize if there's any mistranslation there. But this is a huge resource for folks in the room or the virtual room. The Resource Center has thousands of free resources for you, your governments, your organizations to use as you'd like. Now within this, I'd like to highlight a particular part that's especially great for folks who are either expert or brand new to public engagement work, and that's that beginner guide section. Now within there is the NCDD resource guide. So it's that top little link there. And within it is something called the streams of engagement. Now this is a really helpful framework for you to use to help to decide which methods of dialogue or deliberation best fit the purpose of your engagement goals. What is the intention of your engagement? And then you're going to want to tailor using specific processes. Are you looking for exploration, conflict transformation, decision-making, or for collective action? Now, another offering that NCD has is we host regular events. Now on our website, and if you'll slide over one, Sarah, please. This is the NCD Community Events Calendar. These are both events from NCD ourselves as well as the larger network, as well as content related to dialogue, deliberation, and public engagement work. NCDD also hosts monthly webinars, our Confab and Tech Tuesdays, and these are free calls for anyone to join. The Tech Tuesdays will be lifting up civic tech tools and the newest digital engagement platforms, and our Confabs are opportunities for the community to come together to discuss innovations and challenges in dialogue, deliberation, and public engagement work. In addition to having an active network and robust listservs, we host in-person, usually, conferences every other year. 2020, we are pausing currently, but we look to bring our popular conferences back next year. And if you'll slide one more. This calendar, unfortunately, didn't translate the actual internal data, but the rest of the scene was able to be translated. There is a lot to offer here. Connect with the people. There are a lot of folks passionate and knowledgeable in this work. There's a lot of resources. Use them, share them, the more the merrier. Check it out at ncdd.org.
Thank you, Kiva. Oh, sorry, Natalia. Okay. I'm having PowerPoint problems. All right, Natalia, you ready to go? Want to turn on your, oh. Okay, here we are. Now I just need to get you on screen. We have Natalia. Itse, can you help me find Natalia? Natalia with an N?
Yep, doing that right now. One moment.
All right. We could come back to Natalia. Why don't we do that?
Well, Natalia's spotlighted, but I see she's still muted. Natalia, can you try and talk?
Yes, I was trying.
Uh-oh.
I was trying to access through the phone. Can you hear me? Okay,
Yeah.
so I'll just go ahead.
Great.
I'll try to talk loudly because I know my mic on my computer doesn't work that well, but thank you all. Next slide, please, Sarah. On behalf of our board, we'd just like to thank you for this opportunity to spend some time with you all and to share how our professional organization can enhance some of your public participation practices. My name is Natalia Henschel. I'm a board member and an ambassador for IAP2 USA, which stands for the International Association for Public Participation. And we are a professional organization founded in the vision that in our country, public participation is deeply embedded and widely applied, and where equitable, efficient, and informed decision-making processes can really increase the quality of our democracy. Next slide. So our mission is to lead, advance, and advocate for best practices in public participation. In the US, we have about 2,000 members and over 11 chapters, including one in Sacramento. And we have partnerships with other professional organizations, such as the American Planning Association. And I can see a couple of the chats are coming in that the audio is pretty bad. So I'm trying to talk a little louder. Sorry about that. Just let me know if any of this helps at all. Next slide. The US region is part of a greater international community of different regions, as you can see here listed, and everybody shares the same mission and purpose. IAP2 was established about 25 years ago to put a professional standard on public participation to make it distinct from public relations, marketing, and communications. Next slide. So IAP2's framework is made up of 3 different parts: the code of ethics, the 7 core values, and 5 levels of public participation, which is called the IAP2 spectrum, which you may have heard of. Together, these make up the IAP2's pillars. And I'm just going to highlight really quickly the spectrum here. It might be something that's familiar to you all, but this one acknowledges that all decision making is not created equal, and it's a great tool for being able to decide what level of engagement would be best depending on what the public participation goal is and that corresponding promise that you're making.
It looks like we've lost
Natalia.
Oh, we're going to meet. There we go. We had an echo. I am going to finish through Natalia's slides, if you don't mind.
Can you hear me now?
Okay, yeah. Okay.
And let me, our advocacy work through our ambassador program. We also offer professional certification, a certification process, program for those people who are working as public participation professionals. Next slide. In addition to this, we have a lot of professional development offerings, including our trainings, which have trainings in planning and techniques for public participation, emotion and outrage, and specialty courses. These are now being, in this time, translated to online courses, but in the past have been provided through skill symposiums and different trainings that are done throughout the United States. But as we move forward, we're going to see a lot of these being able to offer online events. We have, again, like I mentioned, our symposium, an annual conference that's either done here in the US or in Canada. And again, partnerships with other organizations like APA to provide some of that continuing education units for these trainings. Specific, next slide, to what's been happening as of late, we've had a couple of different COVID-specific webinars that we offer with our monthly webinars. Next slide. And we've had over 1,000 people participate in those in a couple of coffee chats. Those are available also on our website, along with a resource page that has articles and best practices that can be used now in this time of COVID. So I encourage you to go to our website. The website's on the next slide, and check out what you can find there in terms of all of our resources, and feel free to reach out to me or to any of the board members. The contact information is on the web.
Thank you. Fantastic. All right, Doug, you are up. Oh, look at that.
Thank you, Sarah.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm Doug Linkard. I'm president of the National Civic League. Muy buenos dias. Thank you for having us on. The mission of the National Civic League is to advance civic engagement to build equitable, thriving communities. And I want to underline equitable, because this week and last week and these last few months have been very difficult from an equity standpoint. And I know that for many of us, our hearts are aching at the lack of equity in our law enforcement and health systems. We work with local communities throughout the country to improve their problem-solving capacity, which we call civic capital. And there are 7 elements. Next slide, please. The 7 elements are resident engagement, inclusive community leadership, collaborative institution, culture of engagement, and shared vision and values. We print a Civic Index, which is available on our website for free. You can download it there. And the Civic Index is essentially a self-assessment for communities to look at themselves and ask, do they have the civic capital that it takes to solve problems on a regular basis and be equitable and thriving for all? So that's one of our tools. I'll mention a couple of other tools on the final slide. We sponsor every year annual All-America City Awards, where we recognize 10 communities from throughout the country for their work to use civic engagement to address particular issues. The topic for next year's All-America City Awards is resilience. So we would encourage you to consider applying for the All-America City Award. We also publish a database on our website called the Promising Practices Database, where we provide illustrations and stories from different communities about the kinds of civic capital practices that they have in their communities. And we include links to various communities for more information. We have a quarterly national civic review, and we're always looking for success stories. So please send us your articles, your stories. This now goes to 140,000 readers online throughout the country. So we would welcome your contributions. And finally, we have a program called All-America Conversations. And on our website is a free toolkit for communities to use in having difficult conversations about topics and issues that they face. We're 125 years old, and these days we're focused on civic engagement and equity to build thriving, equitable communities. So thank you for allowing us to join you today. Sarah, I think you might be muted still.
Thank you. Patrick, you want to go ahead and take over the screen share? I know you're going to do a live demo. Uh-oh. You're muted.
Here we go.
There you go.
Hi, everybody. I'm going to just do my screen sharing. See how that works. Are we good?
Go for it.
Okay. Hi, I'm Pat Scully. It's great to be here with you all. I am the managing director of Participedia. Participedia, actually, we're much younger than the previous few projects we've talked with. We're only about 10 years old. We are both a network and a free online resource. I think most people who do know about us through the website and the resources on it. And what I'm going to do is just talk you through what's on here very, very quickly, but I'll try not to talk too fast. So in terms of it being a network, it's made up of about 23 universities from about a dozen countries, all continents except Antarctica. We have another handful of NGOs that are part of it. Most of the work to date has been driven by university-based researchers who serve as co-investigators and collaborators on the project. And each year we've had about 50 students between graduate students and undergraduates who've worked on the project helping to develop content. So what this is, in terms of the kind of content we're trying to develop and use as a learning resource, is our goal is to map and make sense of the growing universe of all types of new channels of participation. So we have a very big umbrella for this. It's everything from protests, which we see are still very important, very vibrant, to very finely structured processes such as deliberative polls, citizens' juries, that sort of thing. So a lot of the work is very similar to the kinds of principles that Kiva talked about and that we heard about from IAP2 are part of the overall work that we do. So what I thought I'd do is just show you a little bit about how this is organized. It's basically organized into 4 different kinds of entries. As you'll see here, there's cases. So cases document specific uses of methods of public participation. And here these dots represent where they're all over the world, and they're on all kinds of issues. Methods are basically the methods entries provide information on the overarching processes used to guide public participation. Organizations, there we go. We've got a bunch of organizations. Are the way we're collecting them here are the profiles of groups that design, implement, or support these different efforts, public participation, democratic innovation, what have you. We have a new thing that we've just launched, a new element called collections. And collections consist of participating entries that share a common trait, such as association with a large-scale initiative, a focus on particular issues, what have you. We have two different kinds here, for example, about responses to COVID. These are very detailed here, the citizens' voices on deliberative and dialogic processes. The COVID-19 response is very, very broad. And actually, I did a quick one just for this conference this morning, just to throw a few things in there. So you could see that in any given collection, you could have everything from a case to a method to an organization. How you search on the site, you can do a broad-based search just like you would on any web browser that uses pretty much the same kind of logic. We also have what we call faceted searches. There we go. So, for example, what's the location? We could find everything that was in any country in the world. What type of approach do they use? How were participants recruited?
This is so great. You want to wrap up?
Yes, I'm going to wrap up. I think the last thing I'll say is that I'm very happy about is that we have recently, I'm going to move my button here, is that this has been made available now in multiple languages. And why that's important is the last thing I will show. This will take 15 seconds. Is that when you look at any one of these entries, how all the information gets here is either a narrative, and there's also all kinds of other data that says a lot more about it. What was the purpose? How were people recruited? Where do they fit on the spectrum of public participation? What have you. Last thing, anybody can go to this. They can enter new information. They can edit existing information as long as you have an account. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Okay, I am re-sharing. Okay, Carl, you are up.
Thank you, Sarah. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're
Great. Thank you very much for letting us share about the Divided Communities Project, with which you're so familiar. Everybody here is concerned with how to engage and build community, and it's exciting to be part of this group. Because the question really is, what can we do now? And the Divided Communities Project was formed in the aftermath of the killing of a 17-year-old boy in Sanford, Florida, Trayvon Martin. And we examined why that community was able to get through the massive protests that took place with 0 arrests, and their resolution was better than it was in Ferguson or in Baltimore or other cities. The Divided Communities Project exists to help local leaders learn from others and engage their communities to address and reduce conflict. Can you go to the next slide for me, Sarah? Or are you in, I don't even know if we're in my presentation right now. Are we? Sarah?
sorry, I was on mute. Yeah, do you see the key considerations slide?
No, I'm still seeing Participedia.
Oh, uh-oh. Okay, something's going wrong. Let me try to reshare.
Why don't you do that, because I don't want to get too far behind in your schedule. If you go to the second slide, the second slide is a screenshot of some resources that are available at no cost on our website. The one on the left that speaks to effective problem solving during community unrest is for communities that are actually engaged in crisis right now. There are checklists, there are resources there that are available to help your local leaders. The most important lesson, though, is to engage the community before there's a rupture in the community, to be proactive, not reactive, to listen for the coming storm, not simply to clean up after the last storm has hit. And that's what the Planning in Advance Guide is for. And it similarly has resources and checklists that you can access for free. Now, could you please go to the next slide, Sarah? We work with lots of stakeholders, national and local advocates and elected officials, community leaders and local leaders, and importantly, those voices in the community that are unheard, because they're very important to the work we're trying to get accomplished. And we've got steering committee members in all parts of the country, including California. Sarah is on our steering committee. Grand Lum, who was part of the program this morning, is the chair of the steering committee. They're all just a mouse click away or a Zoom call away, and we'd love to be helpful to you. Could you go to the next slide for me, Sarah? So, in terms of the things that are now available for us, we've got reports that, for example, show you what, for example, the San Leandro community did in addressing racist incidents in their community, in what they call unity in community. We've created a simulation to help your city leaders test how they would respond to growing conflict in their community. And the simulation we created deals with religious differences and immigration issues that are very current. These are all no cost. We've done them in person. We have done them virtually. We've done them in Florida and Virginia and Texas and California. So we're happy to provide those to you at no cost. We also do something similar for colleges. And we've got an academy program that takes college and university leadership teams and lets them have a chance to deal with the issues that cause polarization on college campuses. There's an academy that's scheduled in August. The deadline for applying is this Friday, so if you know of a university that might benefit from it, please ask them to contact us. And the last thing I'll talk about is the Bridge Initiative, which provides experienced, skilled mediators, community dispute resolution experts to communities in crisis. All of this information is available in our virtual toolkit. I'd love to have you visit us or send us an email, and I'll put our contact in the chat box. Thank you so much for this opportunity, and please stay safe.
All right, Danielle.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. It's great to be here with you all today. This conference has been a really impressive undertaking. Some great work to everyone involved. I'm Danielle Dolan. I'm the Water Program Director for Local Government Commission. For those of you unfamiliar with LGC, we're a California-based nonprofit organization working to build livable communities and local leadership. We do this through innovative programs and network opportunities by advancing policies at the state and local level and implementing solutions as a technical assistance provider as well as an advisor to local jurisdictions. Our guidebook is built on nearly 40 years of expertise organizing and facilitating events, both virtual and in person, but it was actually instigated by a very recent real-time experience converting a large 2-day in-person event into a virtual workshop on a very short turnaround time, just as COVID hit and we all started sheltering in place. We intend this tool to outlive COVID and to help our friends and allies create more effective, engaging, equitable, and inclusive virtual meetings and events. Currently, it's only available in English, but we're seeking funding to translate it into other languages as well. Next. I know plethora of resources have come out in response to our current social distancing. What's different about our guidebook is that it's more than just a list of do's and don'ts or a page of links to additional information. Those things are really helpful, but we've gone a step further. We've combed the best knowledge and understanding that's out there from experts across multiple fields, including many represented at this conference and some of my co-speed daters on this panel. And we've distilled that information into easily digestible, easily accessible guidance. Rather than just converting from an in-person event to a virtual, we encourage you to completely reimagine your engagement from the inside out. First, we outlined some key considerations that are relevant to all different kinds of virtual engagement, whether it's phone or web, real-time or elapsed, webinar, video conference, you name it. And then we address the most important things to think through in order to ensure your efforts are more effective. Next. Then we actually walk you through the process of planning your virtual engagement, providing useful information every step of the way. The basic process outlined on the slide may seem intuitive, but the details in the guide will help you think through things you may not consider, including whether and how to engage in the first place, as well as how much interaction is appropriate for your given purpose, what platform is most user-friendly for your target audience. and other factors. Our goal in providing this as a free resource is to help everyone improve their community engagement efforts to further our collective goal of building vibrant, sustainable, and equitable, resilient communities. We believe that can only be done through more effective community engagement. Next. One back. There we go, thank you. We know that we're not the authoritative expert on virtual engagement, but that's why we've drawn on the work of so many others, and we link to their resources on our website. However, we do have tangible experience and we're willing to help, especially if you're interested, like we are, in connecting leaders, advancing policy, and providing technical assistance in the context of climate change, community design, energy, or water. Feel free to contact me directly or visit our website, lgc.org/virtual engagement. I'll go ahead and put the link in the chat box as well. On our virtual engagement page, you'll find links to additional tools, best practices, and other resources, including those that were presented here today during this speed dating panel. Thank you all and keep up the great work. And I'll also put in a couple links to some other things you might be interested in that LGC is putting together, which is a statewide energy efficiency collaborative forum and a Civic Spark if you're looking for some capacity building support.
Erica, you are up. Slides.
Great. I said, should I get started? I think I'm unmuted.
Sorry, I was on mute. My fault. You go for it.
No problem. Well, hello, everyone. My name is Erica Manuel, and I'm the CEO of the Institute for Local Government. Sarah, can you advance the next slide? So as you all know, this week we have really witnessed, I would say, the power of the people and the importance of having government institutions that listen to their communities and support them. ILG is nonprofit, we are nonpartisan, and we are focused on improving local government from the inside through education, collaboration, and engagement. We believe that fair practices, when they are paired with inclusive and authentic public engagement, that leads to good governance and to healthy, thriving communities. So right now, in this moment, we are witnessing history in the making. The history books are literally being written. And while it is a privilege to live and be alive here witnessing this transformation of our institutions, this is not easy. My organization helps local government leaders in particular navigate complexity, increase capacity, and build trust in their communities. And trust is really what we need right now, I think, more than ever. Next slide, please. We focus on 4 key program areas, and public engagement is one of them. Civics education is another. And as we witness the devastating effects of COVID-19, compounded by the civil unrest that we're seeing in response to centuries of injustice, this team that I lead at ILG, we're energized by the opportunity to support, to serve, and to teach. There are thousands of local government leaders at cities, at counties, and at special districts that really believe in authentic and inclusive public engagement. We train them on best practices, and we try to help them implement systems change that will improve outcomes for the community and for the local agency. We are the official nonprofit of the League of California Cities, the California Special Districts Association, and CSAC, which manages the counties. And together we connect with over 2,500 local governments throughout California. We know and understand local government, and we recognize that the work that they do is really, really hard, and that many times it's thankless. So we believe in building bridges between the state, local, and community organizations and making sure that there are systems in place to improve collaboration and elevate community voices, while we're achieving all of those other critical goals that governments have. You shouldn't really have to choose between one or the other, and ILG believes in creating win-wins. Next slide, please. Next slide. Yes, perfect. We have a lot of free public engagement resources designed with public engagement and government in mind. The first one is on this left-hand side. We've developed a comprehensive public engagement framework called TIERS. Sarah actually played a huge role in that effort. And it's basically a step-by-step approach to implementing authentic public engagement at any level. I've personally been working in this space for more than 15 years, and I know that public engagement is hard, it is tricky, it is messy. I know what it's like to be in a community on the verge of riots. I know what it's like to have to weigh the interests of the community against the interests of people in seats of power. But there are solutions that exist, and if you want to know where to begin, how to approach it, or specifically how to integrate authentic engagement into your government organization, feel free to check our website. The framework is posted there along with step-by-step instructions, and we also do host in-person trainings, which are transitioning to a virtual environment later this year as well. Another resource in the center here is our translation and interpretation equipment. When you think about authentic dialogue and hearing community voices, that requires a knowledge that not all voices speak English. So, California being incredibly diverse and wonderful should welcome the chance to lift up all of those voices, whatever language they speak. And this conference really highlights that. The 3 resources that are on our page are available. You can rent this translation equipment. We will loan it out for free. And it's intended to be used for simultaneous and consecutive translation with a live translator. ILG has been around for 65 years, and we've done dozens of written resources about ethical and inclusive public engagement. And I encourage you to visit our website. When you look here, and you'll see this public engagement toolkit that's really covering how to do public engagement in housing. That's because we think that public engagement should be embedded across policies, issues, and sectors, and that will not change with COVID. Next slide. Times are tough. ILG is here to help. We hope you will stay connected with us through our social media and online channels. And whether you're a state agency, a community-based organization, a philanthropy sector organization, or a corporate partner, we really would love to collaborate with you and engage local governments to create the kinds of communities we all want to live in, work in, and thrive in. And next slide. And then just for my last slide, I just want to leave you with this. We are proud to support any of those that champion equity, justice, and inclusion. Thank you so much for having us, ILG.
Thank you. Thank you all. That was so impressive. Everyone really did it. So we've got, it's 1:08. So I'd say we have about 5 minutes. I know sometimes after I do a very quick talk, I'm always thinking, oh, I wish I just would have said this one other thing. So if there is something you really wish you would have said, now's your moment. Unmute yourself and jump in. We're good? Okay. Let me double check with our crew. Elizabeth, Itza, is there anything that's happened in the chat or the Q&A before we should go to break that you would like to lift up? We're good. This was amazing. This whole thing has been recorded. It will be posted to the conference website after the conference, so folks can check it out anytime. I am incredibly grateful to every single one of you, Kiva, Natalia, Doug, Pat, Carl, Danielle, Erica, you're amazing. Thank you for doing this for us, and take care.
Thank you, everyone. It's great to be with you all.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Everyone.
Thank you all.
I am going to put myself on mute, turn off my camera, and then we will come back at 1:30. Good afternoon. If you are just joining us, welcome to our online environmental engagement conference. Our tagline is building our skills together because we are learning as we go. My name is Sarah Rubin. I work at the Department of Conservation, which is part of the California Natural Resources Agency, one of the 2 agencies sponsoring this conference. So it's the Resources Agency and Cal EPA. It has been an absolute pleasure getting all of this together. I'm part of an amazing team, including Deldy Reyes from Cal EPA, and a crew of 17 volunteers who are working behind the scenes to make sure everything functions well. And we're so grateful to those folks. We're doing what we are calling session 7 of 9, our afternoon session, which runs till 5 o'clock. I'm gonna go ahead and go over the 3 main panels we have ready for this afternoon. The first, we're calling Innovation Underway, Examples of State-Led Virtual Engagement. Then we have an amazing session I was looking at the slides last night and was just thinking, this is incredible. A language access best practice. And then we have a fantastic panel around Indigenous languages and best practices for engagement. And then we will be wrapping up with the chair of the State Water Resources Control Board. So I'm very excited about our lineup. I'm gonna go ahead and jump in. Oh, I'm having some PowerPoint issues. Okay, to jump in, to remind everybody that we have simultaneous Spanish interpretation available throughout all 3 days of this conference. If you haven't had a chance to check out this feature, we encourage you to do so, even if you are a monolingual English speaker. I also want to mention that all of the presentations for the conference are online. If you have not been to or know where to go for the conference website, the easiest thing to do is go to resources.ca.gov, and the image of this conference is the first thing you'll see on the homepage, and you can just click right in. I should do a caveat that since we uploaded the presentations a day ago, there's been a few changes, so after the conference we'll make sure that everything is completely up to date, but most everything you're seeing over these days is already posted for you to peruse. Okay, so with that, I am going to introduce our speakers. I highly encourage you, if you have not yet, to open up your conference packet. The link to the conference packet you can find in the chat feature, because I'd like you to check out all these bios. I'm not going to read the biographies of all of our speakers so that we have the most time for Q&A and discussion toward the end, but it's an amazing group of folks. So we've got Larry Goldsband and Nahal, Nahal, am I going to get it right? Gojee from the San Francisco Bay Conservation and Development Commission. We have Veronica Eady from the California Air Resources Board, Crystal Lazard from the Institute for Local Government, and Anacita Agustinez from the California Department of Water Resources. I feel very privileged to be with you all this afternoon, and I know this is going to be a fantastic session. Oh, wrong way. Okay, so Nahal, I am ready for you to take it away. You ready?
Yes.
Go for it.
Great. Thank you so much, Sarah. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nahal Gogai, and I'm the Environmental Justice Program Manager at the San Francisco Bay Conservation and Development Commission, or BCDC. And I'm joining you all from Berkeley, which is recognized Ohlone territory. We at BCDC believe that all people, regardless of race, ethnic group identification, religion, age, sexual orientation, color, or ability level, should be able to contribute their voices to local and regional planning. This also includes all levels of comfort and understanding when it comes to using new virtual meeting tools, as well as those who might not have access to the internet or to a computer. Therefore, we strive to lead with empathy and recognition that everyone's circumstances are different. In order to create a space where no one feels ashamed to ask for support, we start our events by walking our participants through what might seem like even the simplest steps of how to use these new virtual tools. And in order to be more welcoming towards our phone-based participants, we include instructions on all of our meeting announcements for how folks joining from the phone can mute and unmute themselves. And also we show them how they can raise their hand to ask a question from their phone. And I personally like to offer at least one more opportunity to hear from callers by allowing about 30 seconds to a minute after each Q&A portion of any of our virtual events to give phone-based participants another opportunity to chime in if they didn't feel comfortable with the hand-raising function. A practice that does take some upfront investment, but that provides significant payoff to the flow and overall success of the event, is to assign team members and to have practice runs with this team, especially when the team is also using new tools. So with a recent workshop that we held, we used a brand new web tool to make this workshop more interactive. And the workshop included a team of over 20 staff and partner agency volunteers who all came together ahead of the workshop to work together and learn how to use this new tool in order to effectively facilitate some really great breakout group discussions. So some common team assignments might include tech support, chat moderator, note taker, time moderator, etc. And as far as robust community outreach goes, this is where I think that BCDC is putting more of our attention and seeking out opportunities to develop a strategy to improve this very critical aspect of the work. So I learned a lot actually earlier today from Julia Jordan from the Leadership Council and Sherry Davis from the Participatory Budgeting Project on their presentations in this conference this morning on how to conduct robust community outreach to ensure that the more accurate representation of the communities in our area are actually attending all of these virtual events. So we are working with our community-based partners on sharing our invitations just via email to their constituents, but we still have much work to do on our outreach, so that's a personal priority of mine. So with that, I will pass it over to our Executive Director, Larry Goldspan. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nahal. So my name is Larry Goldspan. I'm Executive Director of BCDC. And what I want to talk about is sort of the internal part of all of this. Because it takes a lot of work to do a meeting well. It doesn't matter whether you're a state agency or a community-based organization who's doing environmental justice these days, or the local PTA. If you don't do the essential pre-meeting work, it's simply not going to work really well. We make sure that there's a detailed script, and that script has each duty that's identified, and it's actually color-coded, believe it or not, to make sure that people know what they're supposed to do and when they're supposed to do it. And we use those scripts in our practice sessions. Practice makes perfect. Nobody likes practice. My kid who played baseball for years hated practice. But the fact is that unless you practice, then things are going to go wrong. And the real important thing about getting these virtual meetings right is that they're harder to actually run well. And they're harder because you're not sitting next to somebody, you're not seeing somebody literally right in front of you. So the ability to communicate is less, which means you need to practice more. And in addition, we collect all the presentations prior to the meeting, and we have a backup system so that if the presentation goes down within a minute or so, a presentation goes right back up. I'm sure that Sarah is doing this as we speak. And so if you don't have the backup, there's nothing worse than that blank screen because the presenter doesn't know what to do and the people who are looking don't really know what to do. And so as a result, you have to collect all the presentations beforehand. Next slide and last slide, please. There we go. So we use Zoom an awful lot, and Nahal talked about having hosts and behind the scenes folks. Yeah, we had 20 people for a 250-person workshop, but for our regular kinds of meetings, it's really just 2 or 3 people, and they have practice and they know how to do things. It is so important as well because you see that checkerboard in front of you, and I'm not going to talk about AB 617, but I'm pretty sure I can get through this stuff, is to have everybody's titles on the screen because they need to make sure, you need to make sure that people know who actually is speaking. You have to mute everybody as they enter. We have elected officials who enter the meetings as our commissioners. We make sure that nobody can hear them talking to each other and saying hello to each other because it's really sort of an invasion of their privacy. We make sure that there are individual links for each participant so we know who's coming into the meeting if they are supposed to be speaking and presenting at the meeting. Not for the public, but for the folks who are commissioners and the like. And of course, as Nahal said, you have to introduce the process and you have to do it well and slowly and more than once because not everybody's used to it. It's going to take some time. So I will finish by saying there's an old joke where somebody gets lost in New York and they go up to somebody and they say, how do you get to Carnegie Hall, the great concert hall? And the person answers, you have to practice. And that's really the bottom line here. When you're doing a meeting, practice once, practice twice. Literally, we practice 3 or 4 times before the first one. And you have to make sure it's a run through the whole way, because that way you know, at least have an idea about what can go wrong. So with that, I will pass it over to the next presenter. Thank you very much.
Perfect. And Veronica, before I go to you, I just want to mention, I know we have more than 300 people viewing us right now on the webcast, and then we have over 200 on our Zoom. So as you hear our presenters, for those on Zoom, we highly encourage you to put your questions in as they come up for you. And for those of you joining us through the webcast, please use the email we have set up to send your question in so we can answer it real time. And that is engagewithus2020@gmail.com. And we're very glad you're here, webcasters. Okay, so Veronica, are you ready?
Ready.
All right, here we are. Go for it.
Great. So I'm Veronica Eady. I'm with the California Air Resources Board. I'm going to talk specifically about a particular bill that we're implementing, and I'm really happy that Crystal Lazard is here. She's going to go into the details of how we conduct community engagement under the bill. But since the bill is complicated, I'll lay out a few little important things about AB 617. So Assembly Bill 617 was a bill that was passed in 2017. And the core purpose of the bill is to understand better local air pollution that local communities and residents are facing, and then through direct collaboration with them, reducing emissions through an emission reduction program. So since 2017, when the bill was passed, so almost exactly 3 years ago, the Air Resources Board has identified 13 communities where we wanted to prioritize work. So those communities you can see on the map, they go across the state from the Bay Area and Sacramento all the way down to San Diego, Imperial Valley. Those communities, the way that CARB has laid out the implementation of the bill, each of those communities has a community steering committee, which I'll go into in a second. But those steering committees are really critical, particularly the residents on those steering committees, to understanding what the sources are, for one, so that the air districts and CARB in some cases, as well as local community residents, know where to put air monitors. Where do we need to understand air quality a little bit better? Let's erect an air quality air monitoring network. Once the data is in, and for some communities there's already quite enough data, and I'll use West Oakland as an example. There was already enough data there that they were able to go straight to the emissions reduction program. The CARB board has, since 2017, or actually since last December, we have approved 4 community emission reduction programs that are currently being implemented. The other 3 that came before the board were not yet approved because of COVID-19, which interrupted our process. And actually very interesting because now we are doing everything virtual. So what we're learning here is really important. Another piece of that is putting together strategies that can be passed on to other communities that are similarly situated, so oil and gas communities, refinery communities, rural communities. And then the third piece of AB 617 is incentive funding and grants that go directly to community-based organizations. So I'm ready for the last slide. One more slide. Can you advance my slide? And then I'll be done, I promise. Thank you. So this slide is about the community steering committees. They are multi-stakeholder. They do need to be at least 51% residents. Generally speaking, they meet monthly, although some meet more frequently. Some that are in the implementation phase meet a little less frequently, maybe quarterly. But the core elements of those meetings are capacity building, and that's capacity building among the residents and other stakeholders for doing air quality management work, but the regulatory agencies also learn and build capacity for working with communities. There's data sharing, and then in the end there is decision making, which leads to the community emission reduction programs. So I'll end there and pass it on to Crystal.
Perfect. Okay, Crystal, you are up. Go for it.
Awesome. Thank you, Veronica. So I'm Crystal Lazard. I'm a program manager at the Institute for Local Government. We're a nonpartisan nonprofit agency that's been around for about 65 years, and we've had the privilege to facilitate the 617 communities of Stockton, Fresno, and Shafter for quite a while. So that's what I'm going to focus my more detailed examples on today. Next slide. So we met like we usually do every month towards the beginning of the month. And then in late March, if you recall, there was a shelter-in-place order issued in late March. And so what we quickly did in early April was a series of phone calls to committee members and quickly assess how they wanted to proceed, frequency and format and what. And we got an overwhelming response from the community steering committee members that they still wanted to continue to proceed. These are not the kinds of meetings that people don't take seriously. They're very dedicated. The members are just incredibly dedicated to reducing pollution in their communities, and they just wanted to continue to show up. So as such, we knew that we have members with lots of different challenges or needs. So we went and did, in mid-April, a survey, and we did it online and by phone and also by mail, just because we have some committee members that don't have access to various technology platforms. And so we really knew that might be the case. And so we did, of all three communities, an assessment to see what platforms they preferred, what technology they currently had, what their needs would be, what sort of format would work best for them, with the goal that we would leave no one out as we switch to a virtual platform to continue with the 617 meetings. So in early May, we heard from the survey results that there were some members in especially our Shafter community that did not have access to the technology that would be required to fully participate in a virtual platform. So because we'd selected Zoom, similar to what we're doing now. So we actually entered into a contract with an environmental justice organization down there to provide both the technology, the data, and the training to the members so they would be able to fully stay engaged. And in April and in May, we proceeded to schedule and host a series of dry run meetings, going back to points I'm sure you've heard throughout this conference: practice, 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 and also giving everybody the equal opportunity as we switch to this new platform to really make sure that everybody is still on board and brought along and that we don't leave anybody behind. So we did practice meetings, and then in May and June, we kicked off a whole series of fully agendized and very technical, multilingual meetings in Shafter, Fresno, and Stockton. And we had not just full participation, but even more robust participation, both from the committee members themselves, and also we live streamed it onto Facebook and had options for the public to weigh in as well. So we were really excited to see just so much interest and participation in what we feared might be, moving to this virtual platform where we leave some people behind. So I just wanted to highlight this one example in the next slide, what we were able to do. And for those of you that work in government, you're aware that sometimes contracting takes a long time. But what the Air District was able to do, the Valley Air District, was able to use some of the AB 617 money to very quickly, within a few weeks, turn around what we call this technology support pilot program. In total, it cost about $3,000 to provide multiple residents. We started in Shafter, and then we're doing the same thing in Fresno, with not just the tablet computers, but also recognizing that they would need cellular data service. So we provided that for 6 months, and a smartphone to provide a hotspot, so they would to ensure connectivity, because it takes a lot of bandwidth to participate in Red News Zoom meetings. And in addition, and this is my favorite part, money to the local community-based organization. In this case, it was the Central California Environmental Justice Network, to provide on-the-ground training and support to any members that needed help. And so that's just one example. I know this conference is chock full of great tips, but one example of a way that you can continue to engage your members or your community despite technological barriers. So I cannot say enough good things about what AB 617, especially in the Central Valley, has accomplished. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Crystal. My apologies for my sensitive PowerPoint screen. So again, I'm going to encourage everyone, especially those of you who are joining us by webcast, go ahead and start putting any questions or comments into the chat and Q&A feature. And we are now going to go over to Anacita. Let's see. There you are. Here we are. Okay. You are on. Oh, you're on mute.
There. Hello. Great. Thank you. We can advance to the next slide. And we can advance once more. Thank you. So it's a pleasure to be here. Yate, my name is Anacita Augustinus. I'm a member of the Navajo Nation. I'm born for the Chwitijitni Bitterwater clan, and I'm born to the Ilocano clan on my father's side. I serve as a tribal policy advisor for the Department of Water Resources. And I'll be sharing my perspectives on the challenges we face as a state government on obtaining the goals of a meaningful online engagement when you're working with tribal communities. So the themes that we have been discussing and expressed throughout this conference, I had the opportunity to listen in this morning and was very impressed, is the language of equity and how equitable engagement is achieved for all governments and communities. And when we say government, and typically when as a employee of the state of California, you know, we're pretty much siloed even when we say government. We're not being inclusive of tribal governments and their status. And when we're talking about public engagement, that's again another siloed process when we think of public engagement, public outreach to stakeholders. And we're not engaging tribal governments as sovereign entities that they are, and we tend to group them in that public comment, public engagement, or as in the stakeholder status. And so we've learned throughout many of our engagement activities at our department that even with our sustainable groundwater management outreach, which is SIGMA, or through our IRWM process, which is Integrated Regional Water Management, when we've done workshops specifically for public outreach, that we have been very successful in reaching out to tribal governments as a sovereign entity by outlining that and acknowledging that they are not a stakeholder, but we're reaching out to them as on a government-to-government basis. And in order to do that, you've got to understand the protocols of engagement on a government-to-government basis. And usually, you know, the best tips for, for local governments that when you're attempting to do that is to, get that training, get an assistance from a tribal coordinator that knows that tribal government community that works in your neighborhood, to make those relationships and those introductions. Someone mentioned earlier, make a phone call, and that really literally is how the best way to start those engagement processes. And tribal engagement's really important, and it's based on so many other different factors, like who determines what type of meeting? And is it an informational meeting? Is it an update? Is it formalized to engage the tribal leadership? And if you're engaging the tribal leadership, are you also, in terms of protocols, engaging the government leadership and the decision makers at the table? And that's something you're always going to want to hear, because time is a valuable investment for any community member. And for tribal governments who are dealing with so many things such as we are, their investment of time must be put on par. When I mention parity and equity, it's with the decision-making process. And then you begin that process and then allowing for relationships to be built so that you can have staff-to-staff meetings that are productive and informational and the appropriate briefing so that the leaderships, the decision makers can have the tools that they need to make the big decisions that are going to be engaging those communities. in addition to like determining what type of meeting, you need to know who is going to be present. Where is it going to be leadership? Is it going to be staff? Well, the meetings start traditionally with a prayer. And how do you ask for a prayer in this new online virtual world? Is it appropriate? These are questions that tribal communities themselves are dealing with. And of course, what is the platform that's being hosted? Because a lot of times when you're working with tribal governments, that you need to maintain confidentiality and what data is being shared and what information is being shared. And the respect of those protocols need to be set forth in an early groundwork so that you can have a meaningful conversation and get to the business at hand. And I just want to end this slide with, we cannot lose the fact that tribal governments are sovereign entities. And I always encourage every local government or local commission I work with that your web pages should also make that distinction when you're talking about who your stakeholders are. That you're looking at your general stakeholders, but you're also saying tribal communities within our jurisdictional boundaries are recognized, and that we know that they're there, and there's an open opportunity for their engagement. Because typically, if you look at your web pages, take a look, and does it just say public, and does it just say stakeholders? Are you actually in putting some information out there of how a tribal leader or a representative could engage with your program? And we can go to the next slide. This slide here is relating to priorities and perspectives from tribes. As a member of a state agency, I like to point out there's a lack of capacity that we always hear on behalf of not only our stakeholders, but also on behalf of tribal governments. But what I really wanted to point out with this slide is that there is a lack of capacity on the side of state agency people. We have a lack of human resources, and we're going to be seeing even more strain on our resources with our budget crisis that we're going to be facing in the next couple of years. I work for the Department of Our Resources, and we deal in flood emergencies, drought emergencies, and other agencies, and it's always a mad scramble of resources available to the public. The Natural Resources Agency and Cal EPA, we have over a combined employments of over 8,000 employees. Now, obviously, we serve over 40 million Californians in the state of California, of which approximately are 1 million Native Americans. And of that 1 million, that's over 270 tribes in California alone. And if you think about that number, that is unique to California. It's almost, a third of the tribes throughout the state, throughout the United States. And that's in California. And of that number, 110 are federally recognized, and over 70 plus are non-federally recognized. And then you also include with that number many other tribes within California that are not indigenous to California, but that are here in California, part of the urban and rural makeup that have been put into the California diaspora because of our federal government policy of relocation and termination. And so that's a very unique tribal government. So it's incumbent upon agencies to understand who is your tribal government. Are you dealing with a federally recognized tribe? Is a non-federally recognized tribe that needs more assistance or has lack of resources? Are you dealing with an urban environment that has been there through generations that are also seeking help and have an investment and in that community that you're serving? Every state agency, such as Department of Resources and Cal EPA and Natural Resources, we all employ tribal liaisons and tribal advisors. Our jobs are to execute our tribal engagement policies and maintain the intergovernmental relationships with tribes on that government-to-government basis. And we do this work often without staffing and often without adequate training or knowledge or experience. And we've all learned on the job, including myself, but we all need to start somewhere. And I really support all the new hires within the state that are taking upon these new positions. Meaningful tribal engagement is statutorily defined in the government code and in the Public Resources Code. And these standards are further defined through our state consultation policies. And our state consultation policies have been issued under Governor Brown, Executive Order B 1011, and that's B as in Brown, and Governor Newsom's Executive Order N as in Newsom 5420. And that executive order was issued last July, and it was very significant because it was the very first public apology on behalf of the state of California to California's tribal governments. And then for local agencies, you're bound by SB 18, which is a statute that's been on the books since 2015, requiring local engagements for your tribal communities. And so I like to ask our audience to think about how we achieve parity and meaningful engagement when we have all these issues with tribes and, of course, these perspectives and priorities. And we can advance to the next slide. An example of something we just recently did at our department is we just hosted a tribal regional water management webinar. It was over a series of 3 parts, over three Tuesdays in a row. We had really great engagement. And I do think one of the important things that we assembled with this webinar, which the purpose of the webinar is how to access proposition bond funding for water infrastructure for tribal governments. But we incorporated a tribal-only caucus on the second day. And it was an hour dedicated to just tribal governments alone, and then was facilitated by a tribal GO. And I think that's super important. I think I heard that earlier about this opportunity to have a forum that a community is comfortable with, that you also look at your facilitators that know the community, so that you have tribal governments very, very much more willing to share and participate. And I do think it's creating that cultural space and being able to have those parties. And we can advance to the last slide. And I just wanted to share and leave you with these images. These are images, we've heard about, limited broadband accessibility, which is across the state in many of our disadvantaged and underrepresented communities. But, our Native millennials, they're doing wonderful things with their limited resources. So these are images of some really successful social media campaigns that deal with political issues. And I just thought I'd share that with you. And I really appreciate everyone sharing your valuable time with me. And I look forward to answering any other questions and any other public commentary. But thank you, and thank you to my co-panelists and to all who have been doing an incredible job of allowing this access and this forum for all our communities.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So now we have a good 10 minutes for discussion and questions. I'm gonna look to Abraham and Jessica. Is there anything you two would like to lift up from the chat to start us off?
There's nothing in the email, Sarah, thank you.
Okay, so nothing in the Gmail or within the Zoom? Okay. So what I'm going to do, panelists, is I'm actually going to ask you to comment on each other's presentations. This was so chock full of very helpful information. Anything that it sparked for you or another thought you would like to share with the folks who are joining us today? Just unmute yourself and go for it.
Can I jump in? Can I jump in, Sarah?
Oh, sorry.
We'll do Larry, then Veronica.
Okay.
No, Veronica, you go first. Go.
Veronica, then Larry.
Okay, thank you, Larry. I just wanted to comment on Anasita's presentation, and there was somebody in the chat who appreciated Anasita clarifying that tribes are not stakeholders. And that's a really important point. And I do want to just say that with regard to AB 617. We have been working independently with a few tribes, and we funded probably like half a dozen tribes to put together their own tribal air monitoring network. And so that's pretty exciting. We're working with 29 Palms, we're working with Morongo, many others, and they're connecting with each other on air quality. So thank you, Anasita, and that's a really important point.
Great. All right, Larry, we're going to go to you, and then I have a question for Anasita.
Thanks. I noticed in the chat that Danielle actually mentioned something that I think is really, really important. Doesn't matter if you're in state government or whether you're a CBO, NGO, or whatever. It's more expensive to do virtual engagement. It just is, because you're paying your people. There's not only the same amount of money, but you have to use technology to do it. It takes more time. It literally takes more resources to do this almost as well as you would do it physically. And I think that one thing I would suggest for ILG, LGC, and other organizations that I think are really, really great in this is to work together and try to quantify that, and work with Sarah and work with the folks who are presenting and quantify how much it actually costs to do this. Because those costs need to be dealt with if you are grantees and the like. And I am pretty sure that the forward-thinking grant makers will, knock on wood, recognize that. And I think it's something that they will recognize if you quantify it. And I think that's the important thing to do.
I just want to say in response to that, Larry, with respect to AB 617, virtual is actually a lot cheaper for us because we're sending teams of 10 or 15 staff all over the state in 13 different communities. And for the remote communities, it also means that we have to spend the night there. So, but I do appreciate that it's a much different cost. And we should quantify that too.
And for us, for example, on the commission side, when we have commission meetings, you have 27 commissioners, we have to buy stuff and we have to make sure that our staff has the equipment it needs to do all this work, which candidly, the state is probably not going to actually provide to us because the state's in difficult situations. My gut tells me that local governments as well as NGOs and CBOs don't have the equipment necessary to actually do the job as well as they should. And it's going to cost them more money to do this. So I think it's both ways.
I'd like to jump in on that conversation. This is Anasita speaking. We have to really be careful because it's easy to say for us, because we've got the technology, we've got the access, we've got the budget. And then to also continue to, and it's, we may say that the digital divide exists, but there's also that social divide, because there's nothing that replaces the ability to shake the hand of an elder, to hear from that person. And you don't get that unless you create that sacred space and you honor that sacred space. And as agency people, we're always seeking from our stakeholders, from our tribal governments, information, because we cannot do our job without their engagement. And we're trying to do our job at what is the most easiest and efficient for us on our side of the table. So I really, really emphasize that we can't let the ease of technology, and it's good to look at the metrics of budgets, because that'll help us, but we can never ever, avoid the metrics of what is the losing that social engagement process. I feel like we have just come to a certain level of communication with tribes, and then COVID hits, closure hits, and then you have new statutory requirements. And as I mentioned in one of my slides, we're, as a state agency, regulatory compliance and projects have deadlines, and we're asking everyone to comply by those requirements. And so it's just a caution.
Thank you. So before we go to this one question that came in for you, Anasita, I just want to mention, Larry, since you brought up the idea of someone should get a grant. Is it 3 years ago at ILG, we did try to get a grant for something like that. It was us with Public Agenda, Matt, who spoke earlier today, and then another nonprofit in New York called Cities of Service. That was through the Bridge Initiative, and it was one of those things where I think they wanted to fund us. They wanted to do all the work for like a third of the money, and we couldn't pencil it out. So people are pursuing or trying to pursue what you're bringing up. So Elizabeth, can you read the question that we've got for Anasita, and then we're probably going to need to just do a very quick closing if anyone wants, and move on. Elizabeth?
Hi, yes. Anasita, what other methods should we use to consult with tribes when we do not get a response to our outreach letters?
You continue to do your best. You continue to, it's not just letters, you do phone calls. You actually go and make a visit. I do know that because we have, if you're dealing with the deadlines, you also have to maintain your communication record. So you do your due diligence in maintaining your administrative record or your communications log. But and as I mentioned before, sometimes you just need to pick up the telephone and just keep trying to make that phone call. But the other thing too is, see what other partners are out there in the community that may have a relationship with that tribe. They may not be familiar with it. If you're a new organization, to introduce yourself. So maybe leverage other partners in that attempt.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, so it's almost 1:15 and we are going to wrap up. So we have a little break before our 2:30 session. Nahal, anything you'd like to say as we start to get ready to go?
Thank you. I actually was wanting to kind of circle back to the comment that Anasita made about engaging elders and those important voices that often have more difficulty, with these tech tools. I was curious if anyone has actually sent staff to go do some tech troubleshooting for those individuals, because, we had an issue with one of our EJ elders who is incredibly critical to these conversations in West Oakland, Miss Margaret Gordon. And I was tempted to just go to her house the weekend after and help her out and just make sure I was safe. I don't know if Larry would approve that or not, safety-wise, but I wonder if anyone has done that.
I can jump in. So I know the Valley Air District goes through contracts with, like the Central California Environmental Justice Network, providing that tech training that I mentioned earlier, has done that. And then we've also done a lot of check-in calls and a lot of additional prep work. Getting back to Larry's point about it being cheaper or more expensive, it's both cheaper because we don't have to travel, but more expensive upfront because there was a lot of training that ILG and the Air District and the community members themselves had to do. And to get ahead of that, while we understood that the training was only, learning takes time, right? We did a lot of, the Air Districts themselves would go and drop packets of just paper at people's houses, translated materials and everything, just to make sure that and we always had like a separate conference line available if the Zoom didn't work for them. We just, you have a plan A, but then you also have a plan B and C. And yeah, sometimes it does take going to someone's house and dropping off materials just in case things don't work. We want them to work. We want them on the Zoom. We want everybody in the same platform. But I'd rather, prepare for the worst, hope for the best. So there's, we're definitely aware of that in the Central Valley. It's real.
Yeah. Veronica, any last sentence you want to say before we wrap up?
I do not have any final words of wisdom, but it was really great to hear from all of the co-panelists, and Nahal just mentioned Miss Margaret Gordon, who's one of our favorite people to work with. So I think we're doing a lot of great work together, and I appreciate this opportunity for us to learn from each other.
Fantastic. All right, well, I am starting to launch our poll to find out from those of you who are participating, at least through Zoom, if this was beneficial. For those of you who are participating through the webcast, we would love for you to start an email with our special conference email address, engagewithus2020@gmail.com, and share with us if this was beneficial, and specifically what's one thing that you got out of this session that you really enjoyed. And then once you click through the poll, for those of you on Zoom, after you've done the poll, can you please open your chat box? And we are asking you to share one thing that was especially useful or beneficial for you, and you can share that in Spanish or English about this session. We want to learn from you, and we're hoping that what you have to share is useful to the others that are on. Okay, who have I not heard from for a closing comment? Larry, you want to say anything else before we go? And Anasita?
I think this is great. Thank you so much.
Okay, wonderful. All right, then I'm going to leave this open for just another moment. And then I'm going to show the results of the poll. And then I'm going to be putting us all on mute so we can have a good 10-minute break before our next session at 2:30 is going to be absolutely fantastic with Marina Perez and Mavish Hassan, who Crystal and I have worked with a lot and are big fans of. So, okay, so far we have about 50% of folks who have participated. Let's see. Elizabeth, is there any last comment, not question, but comment from the chat you would like to elevate while we're waiting for the poll for people to take the poll?
Those comments are saying that the tribal engagement information was really helpful about respecting cultural values and reviewing the basics.
Wonderful. All right. So thank you everyone for participating. I am going to end the poll for now and share the results. And thank you so much, panelists. This was absolutely fantastic. We know it was a lot of work to prepare. We appreciate your time, and we hope you will come back and stay for the rest of the sessions this afternoon. We'll see everyone at 2:30. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Sarah Rubin. Let's see here. I'm having PowerPoint issues. Hold on one second. Here we are. So one thing I've been talking about all day today, for those of you who've been with us for a lot of the day, is I've been talking about this idea. It's something Mavish and I also talk about a lot when we train together, is what's happening behind the curtain. And so since today is about learning together, our title is Online Environmental Engagement, Building Our Skills Together. In our last session, I realized I accidentally had a file that didn't have all of our formatting updates. So let me just jump back right in. If you are just joining us, great. So we've got over 200 people on Zoom, and I know we have over 200 people joining us by webinar. If you are new, thank you for joining us. My name is Sarah Rubin. I work at the Department of Conservation, which is part of the California Natural Resources Agency. And that is one half of the two agencies putting this conference on, along with Cal EPA, my colleague Deli Reyes, and the very large crew of folks who are working on this conference behind the scenes, in addition to our 60 presenters over our 3 days. So,
Sarah?
Yeah.
I don't see the slides currently. It's just all.
I'm glad you're telling me.
Yep.
I wonder why. New share. You see it now?
Yep.
Oh, good. Okay. Fantastic. So I am a mediator and facilitator, and we've had so many fantastic tips today about our various tips for our virtual meetings. And one that I want to share before I turn things over to Mavish and Marina is that when we got all the panelists' PowerPoints back from the translator, the formatting was really messed up, and because it's more words. And so it's something that we took the time to correct the images and the sizing. And I especially want to do a quick apology to Anasita from the last panel, because I accidentally showed the slides before I had fixed them. So it's a small glitch, but it's something we can all learn from. So I am very pleased to introduce our next session with my colleagues Mavish Hassan, who is a language access and immigrant engagement expert, and Marina Perez, who is with the State Water Resources Control Board. Oh no, I can't believe we messed up your title, Marina. You're gonna kill me. So I'm gonna let you reintroduce yourself because I know you are a manager. So Marina, why don't you say hi so you can introduce yourself?
Sarah, can you hear me? This is Natalie. The poll is still up and it's being broadcasted. Can you take the poll down?
Thank you. Is it gone, Natalie?
No.
I just want to, the poll is not up on our end. If it doesn't go away, you can actually exit out of it. So I don't believe it's actually being broadcasted.
Okay. Well, in the chat box, if you are seeing the poll and it's a problem for you, why don't you go ahead and let us know? And then otherwise, Marina, why don't you say hello?
Hey, hi, this is Marina Perez. I'm with the Office of Public Participation at State Water Board. I'm a manager, and I'm really happy to be here, being able to share some of my experiences and best practices regarding language access.
Mavish?
Good afternoon, everyone. I know there's A, a lot going on in the world, and B, it's the post-lunch hour. So thank you for joining us on both ends of that meaningful / meaningless piece of what's going on in our lives.
Thank you, Mavish. So Mavish, I am just going to remind everybody about our interpretation option one more time, especially if you are new in joining us. We have simultaneous Spanish interpretation happening throughout all 3 days of this conference. Even if you are monolingual English, we highly recommend you check out this option and see what it's like to toggle back and forth between the channels. One thing we've already talked to all of our speakers about is being mindful to not speak too fast because we have interpretation happening. And before I hand things over to Mavish, I am just going to remind us that there are 3 ways to participate, and we highly encourage you to use them. One is the chat feature in Zoom. One is the Q&A feature. If you have any questions, type them as we go. For those of you who are on the Cal EPA webcast, please use our Gmail that we have set up for this session. And that is engagewithus2020@gmail.com. I'll say it one more time. We hope you will send us questions and comments. engagewithus2020@gmail.com. Okay, Mavish, you ready to go?
Great, thank you. And I think I'm able to move this forward.
Try it.
Oh, there you go. Okay, welcome once again.
Is that where you want to be?
That's where I want to be, and then we can move into the polling.
It's very sensitive, let me warn you.
Okay. So the first polling question.
Uh-oh. Okay, let's see, James, I am not, when I saw this polling question earlier today, but I'm not seeing the polling question as an option now.
Let me look at the polls.
Mavish, I think what I'm going to suggest we do is you go ahead and then let's circle back to the polls if we pull them up. Sound good?
That sounds perfect. So we are going to keep going. And it is very sensitive. So welcome again. So we are talking about language access as really a pillar of equity, and what does equity even mean? There's a lot of different definitions of equity. I'm sorry. So maybe it is easier if you control the slides and take it back.
Might be.
Yeah.
It's taken a lot to learn how sensitive it
Okay.
is.
Okay. There we go. So perfect, equity. So just a lot of different definitions of what equity means. And this was one that I really heard at a conference, and it stuck with me, and I got a permission to use it. It's really about, are you invited to the party? Are you asked to help plan the party? Or do you feel welcome and comfortable at the party? So those are all different ways of approaching the issue of diversity, inclusion, belonging. But equity really is, you get to redefine what the party is and who has the power to plan the party. Slide. And so what does it mean when we are talking about equity in the context of public agencies, as we're thinking about online engagement for state agencies, there's probably some municipal agencies as well, but really thinking about it in the context of participation. This idea of social cohesion, you might hear of it as a social contract. There was a great Trevor Noah piece that talks about that social contract as well. And in some ways, at a very social media level, I felt like spoke to this idea of the role of public agencies as well as communities, whether they are traditionally or historically marginalized communities, to really come together to create a vibrant, secure, cohesive community. And again, it resonates forever, but all the more so today. Slides this week. And there's a number of different networks nationally, some that are very active, and Marina's going to talk a little bit about her work. So certainly there's folks within the state who are part of the Government Alliance for Race and Equity and Welcoming America, which is a national and really international movement building inclusive communities. Slide. So what does it mean when we're talking about language ability? And I just want to be clear that a lot of what I'm sharing is based on work that I've done more with municipal governments and also around language when it comes to English language learners. So I just want to put that caveat. There's all sorts of accessibility issues. So we need just the previous slide for a second, Sarah, in terms of what it means when you think about the numbers. So there's 44% of Californians have speak a language other than English at home. So amazing asset that can be tapped into. And yet at the same time, a good 19%, so almost 7 million, have limited English proficiency or may be classified as English language learners. What does it mean for the future of California? Almost 11% of children live in LEP or limited English proficiency households. And 22% of students in the public schools are English learners. So this is what's going on in terms of the now and what it implies in terms of the future. Next. And so there's all these law and there's all sorts of challenges that come with limited in any sort of way. And when we get to the poll, hopefully some of us will get to experience some of those challenges. I know I certainly did. Was really there's the civic, political, social implications to not being able to communicate or be understood in a different language. It keeps communities from getting and keeping employment, accessing or understanding what services they have a right to, that they qualify for, and then being active participants in their communities, whether it's virtually or not. Because this is amazing that we have the simultaneous translation in Spanish, And so it's amazing to be talking about this as we are walking the talk, but also what does it mean for communities that may be speaking indigenous languages versus Spanish. So,
Mavish,
yes.
the poll is ready, and I actually think this is a perfect time, since you just did this slide, to do your first question.
Perfect. So let's go to the polls.
Anything you want to say to introduce this?
I am not going to say anything. If you can understand this, just go ahead and respond.
Well, we want everyone to respond.
No.
Right?
No.
Oh, okay.
If I hadn't done a little bit of research, I know personally I wouldn't have been able to respond. So I think sometimes the survey data or any data tells you as much in terms of what you learn and what, as well as what you don't learn. So who has the time to complete a survey, or who has the ability to complete a poll?
I don't know how long we want to leave this open, or if we want to pull behind the curtain now.
We can pull behind the curtain now, sure. So that was really environmental rights. Oh, thank you. For all of you who were able to, who are participating and are able to understand, and if you use Google Translate, that's okay too. It's about, using the tools we have to look at, to respond to environmental rights or human rights in Serbian, Arabic, and Swahili.
Very cool. Okay.
Great.
Shall I do the
Next.
second one?
Let's do the next one. Sure.
Yeah. Okay, here it comes.
Okay, so how familiar are you with language access laws or ordinances that apply to your agency? Not at all, somewhat, very familiar.
And Mavish, generally when I've been doing these polls, I've also been asking folks to do a little follow-up in the chat to share a little bit more behind, and I wonder if that would be helpful to you.
That would be super helpful. Yep.
So we're going to ask everyone to open their chat and share a little bit more about how they've become familiar with language access laws, maybe?
Yes, sure, that would be super.
Great. Okay, well, why don't I leave this open just a little bit more? And it's up to you if we want to just pause a moment, or if you want to say anything else about this slide.
No, I think in the interest of time, maybe we will keep going, and I'll monitor the chat, and I know others are monitoring as well. So if there's anything that comes up.
Shall I go to the next slide?
Yes, please. And that might be moot, because I think let's try the next. Yeah. So the next slide was really, it's the laws. There's federal and state, and Marina, my co-panelist, is going to tell you even more exciting stuff in terms of, it's not, there's a whole third law. So I'm going to not remove the curtain too much and let her talk about it. So why does it matter? I think at the core of it is really about trust that community members can create with each other. And I say with each other is a really important piece as well, as well as the trust with the system, because there's some amazing alliances and alliance-based efforts that have always existed, and yet. Thank you. I'm just looking at the poll results as well, so I got a little distracted, but thank you. So there's, I know you'll have access to these slides, so the federal as well as the California state laws that govern it, the California Civil Rights Act, and then Marina will go into it in greater depth. But this idea of really being able to build trust and being able to communicate, which eventually really leads to more buy-in, a better outcome, or more efficient, effective decision-making process. Next. And I'm not going to read all of this, but really it's about being mindful. We are doing simultaneous translation as we speak now, but really the written text, the slides as you see are the translated. And there are a number of times when, you know, we've caught each other in terms of not using those interchangeably. The main thing really is whether you're translating or you're interpreting, whoever you're using needs to be certified to do that. Just because, and we'll go to the next slide, just because someone's bilingual, it doesn't mean that they are able to translate. And I know we have certified translators amongst us today. And while I'm bilingual, I'm not certified. So you really don't want to read a translation that I would work on. It wouldn't be very good. And it's not just about getting materials translated. It's really also making sure that back to that trust and relationship of being in partnership with trusted community navigators. And I'm channeling Nancy Ducos, who's with us today as I say that, but also really partnering with the community first and foremost to identify what the language needs are. And there's a lot of discussion, at least in terms of as you're thinking about the emergency management, emergency response that's going on, as you know, whether it's COVID or the floods or the fires, it shouldn't be an afterthought. It should really be the language access person needs to be at the table as you're defining, designing what those messages are, because then it's actually going to make it much easier to translate. And to use the bilingual and bicultural staff appropriately, right? Don't use them as translators and interpreters if they're not certified. Next. So this is the bilingual piece again. So what does it mean when we're thinking about community engagement? We've talked a lot about really understanding the needs and capacities, recognizing whether you need to translate or to interpret or what. And if you're going to translate, what you need to translate. Is it just the invites? Is it just the materials? Is it everything? And then, you know, it's like you start early and do often, but making sure that you're having a community review to make sure that the key messages are appropriate. And that's another thing, I think internationally around global health, there's a lot of discussion about how do you translate social isolation, right? And what does that mean? How do you say social isolation in Swahili, and what does that really even mean? So I think that's certainly something that is relevant for a lot of communities. Okay, next. And some lessons, you know, great to have a co-facilitator who ideally speaks not only the language, but the appropriate dialect. Doing the pre-work, there was a lot of pre-work that was involved in the slides that Sarah lifted the curtain on in terms of the formatting, but also really coaching us as panelists through this process as well, and to make that time out that it takes. So I'm, you know, I tend to speak faster, and I'm trying really hard to be mindful of the pace of my speaking. So next. And then we were talking about, I just want to lift up a few examples before I close. There's a lot of work, an improvement people have learned. You know, the fires that happened this past year created a learning opportunity for people, for public officials in those communities to really understand it's not just about translation, it's not just about having the services, but it's really making sure that people understand that it's a safe place to come and access those services as well. You will hear, if you have later on, from the city of San Jose, who's going to be talking about their language access work, and they've been doing webinars in language around accessing PPP loans for small businesses, both in Vietnamese as well as in Spanish. And this was, you know, just an announcement of that. There's a lot of public officials who not only appearing on regular news channels, but really on ethnic, both radio as well as television, and then creating multilingual resources. Some other examples that I wanted to lift up, and you can certainly do this online in terms of Zoom rooms. It's almost easier to have small groups or focus groups in language so that you're really getting people to provide input on policies and plans. And a specific example was really the whole language access policy that was developed in the city of Long Beach was done by, with community input. They helped develop it. We have the Civic Academy queen in our midst, Nancy Dico. So thank you. But it's a model that she started in the city of Mountain View with Spanish, expanded to Russian. There's also ones in Vietnamese. Another example is the City County of San Francisco that offers grants for language access. And their most recent grant actually was to provide in-language access, not for the threshold languages that like the top 3 languages that might be spoken, but really for the less spoken languages for domestic violence survivors. So that was a really unique twist on, a lot of times we focus on what are the key essential languages. So that was a good, that's how they're using their most recent grant. Okay. And these are just some resources. There's probably tons more. I'm really excited to hear how Marina, everything I've learned from Marina already, that I'm so thrilled that she's going to share with all of you. And then we'll take questions.
Right. Thank you so much, Mavash. Good afternoon. Buenas tardes. My name is Marina Perez, and I'm with the Office of Public Participation with the State Water Board. I'm really honored to be here in such great company. Mavash, that was a great overview on language access, and it's very much appreciated. And so I'm hoping that I'll make sure to provide information that complements that great background that you provided. I'm going to share 2 main topics that have been based on my experience working in both the public sector and the private sector throughout California. I'm originally from Los Angeles, recent transplant to Sacramento, and I've had the wonderful experience of working with diverse communities in both the urban and the rural settings throughout California. So again, these topics are based on my inner experiences and interface with various community stakeholders and community-based organizations. So as Mavash indicated, California is one of the most diverse states in the U.S. Spanish is the second most commonly spoken language in California. And we have more than 27% of our residents are Californians who are foreign born. So providing language access services is key to involving and engaging all Californians in the public participation process, and also in providing an opportunity to relay critical information, as well as providing a vehicle to a feedback loop to provide feedback from our stakeholders. However, we still have a ways to go. We've made some significant strides, but we definitely have a lot more work ahead of us. The current disproportionate impact of COVID-19, predominantly affecting communities of color, EJ communities, have really demonstrated the importance of communicating effectively in multiple language. But not only just communicating effectively in languages, but communicating clearly in these languages. These communities are also the ones that are most impacted, not only by climate change, but also with the most recent fires. So, I think overall, I guess my message to all that are participating in this session, to community organizations as well as government agencies, is that we need to really recognize and take action to prioritize language access as a priority. That is something that needs to be looked at as a critical need, because this need will only grow with time. So the sooner that we get on it and make it a priority, I think that this will really help us in the long run. Next slide, please. So Mavash touched upon some of the laws and regulations regarding language access. And, I would, in addition to that, I want to add just a few others. One in particular that I'll point out to, which is very close to home, and that's one of the Water Code 13304, which pertains to site cleanup and public participation requirements. And that particular code I bring to light because it's one that requires all materials, informational materials, as well as any public workshops or meetings to be conducted in the language or languages spoken in that particular community. So I wanted to bring that to light because that's an example of a really great regulation that has really made an impact in the way that we work with communities, especially communities of color, in building trust by providing information in an understandable manner and providing workshops that provide interpretation, simultaneous interpretation to inform them and involve them in site cleanups that are taking place in their communities. Additionally, we also have the California Code that I mentioned there as well as the Plain Writing Act of 2010. These two acts, these two laws I want to really point out are ones that focus on plain language. And the reason why I'm saying this is because, you know, it's not enough just to provide materials in another language. We really need to make sure that what the documents we're providing in English are understandable to begin with, because you know, it's not helpful if we develop a document in English that's not understandable in English and then have that translated, because guess what? If it doesn't make sense in English, it's not going to make sense in another language. So, you know, we need to take a step back and really look at what we're producing in English. So, you know, the Plain Writing Act of 2010 and the California Code that I mentioned, you know, it really states that it's for government agencies to use clear communication that is understandable to the public. So like I mentioned, you know, sometimes our documents, and I've worked with many teams, and through no ill will or no fault of theirs, you know, they're basically just following the rules. Say, okay, we have this document, let's translate it. But it doesn't always work because, you know, if it's not understandable, then we're not communicating effectively. So my point being is that we need to make sure that anything we develop in English is understandable in another language. I've spoken with various community leaders and representatives of community organizations who shared with me that, you know, they have their constituents who come to them and say, can you please make sense of this because it doesn't make sense in either language. And then something else to keep in mind is that, you know, oftentimes children of limited English speakers are often tasked with making sense of these documents for their parents. It's not something that children should be doing. You know, as a child of immigrant parents, I often found myself in those shoes, and it's not, it's a big onus to put on children. So, so let's look at preparing materials in plain language. So next slide. So what exactly is plain language? Plain language is really writing in a clear, concise, and organized manner that's appropriate for your focus audience. The information should be clear enough to be able to be read in one sitting, really, and not have to reread it over again. So it's basically plain, straightforward, and to the point. Another thing that I'd like to add to this regarding plain language is this, and this is a very simple rule of thumb. If you can explain your material to your grandmother, then you can, you know, I think you can be successful in explaining something in plain language. Back a few slides, Sarah. Let's go back to the cartoon. There you go. Right there. Okay, so this is my next slide, and that's really just, I think that this animation says it all. You know, when you read something that's too complex and not in plain language, you get that stunned look. And when you're able to read something that's understandable, you know, you see the face, it's a little happier. So this reaction really captures the sentiment of plain language. Next slide, please. So, well, there are several principles for plain language. I'm just going to share a few of them in the interest of time. The most important one that I would say is that I see a lot of agencies, a lot of organizations doing is that they write documents that are intended for themselves or their peers, and they often forget about the audience. So it's really important to be able to know who your audience is and write appropriately for them. Stick to the main points before going into detail. Keep your paragraphs to one idea, keep them short Use as many short sentences as much as possible. Use everyday words, avoid acronyms, avoid technical terms. If you are going to be using technical words, try to explain them on the first reference. Avoid unneeded words. And something that's really key that you'll see is that it's really important to use headers or bulleted lists or tables to make reading a lot easier. Next slide, please. So here's an example. Here is a short informational piece on Medicaid that I found online. If you can see, go back, Sarah, please. One more. Sarah, there you go. So if you look at these two examples, we have an English version and you have a Spanish version. And you notice that this text, it is text heavy. You see a lot of technical terms. And you see that the sentences are pretty long. It's like one contiguous sentences. The Spanish, of course, the Spanish translation is going to look the same. So that's what happens when we write technical documents. They look kind of harsh they're kind of harsh to read, but when it's translated, you'll see that it's going to be done in the same way. So let's go to the next slide. Next slide. Okay, this is the plain language makeover. Okay, so you see the difference here. You'll see that the English version and the Spanish version look very similar. They're shorter sentences. They're using a bulleted list, and they are sticking to the main points. Okay, so again, here's an example of how when you write in plain language in English, the translation will also be in plain language. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is something that I wanted to spend more time with, but in the interest of time, I'm going to keep it very simple. How do we get started with plain language? Well, there's something that's readily available on Word, and it's a readability tool. And it's a quick tool that helps you with writing plain language in that it measures your readability statistics. So really it shows and measures your complexity of your writing. Back slide, Sarah. One more. There you go. Okay. So it measures reading ease and grade levels using the Flesch-Kincaid grade scale. So typically a standard rule of thumb is to try to write between a 7th and 8th grade level. Okay. So this is something that you can activate on Word. And in order to help you with that, I inserted a link that can walk you through it. It's very simple, and it's very helpful. Once you get on this, I think you're going to get hooked on it, and you'll actually see how complex some of our writing can be. For the most part, most government agencies are writing at a 15th and 16th grade level, which means college, when, as you can see, as Mabash shared earlier, you know, a lot of our audience members range in literacy levels, and they're not typically at that high level that we're writing for. Next slide. So next question is, okay, we have language access laws, regulations, we know how to write plain language. So how do we determine what our audiences are speaking? Well, going back to what Mabash was saying is that we need to consider language needs early and always. We live in a diverse state, and it's really important for us to always keep that as top of mind, to consider that a particular project will need language of some services of some type. So how do we determine that? There are a few different ways. You can consult with community advocates, social service providers, school sites, school websites are really excellent ways to really determine or identify demographic information, as well as the county and city websites, U.S. Census Bureau. We also have EJ Screen or Kellen Byers Screen that provide robust, demographic information. So there's different ways. All you have to do is ask. Next slide, please. So what are some of the best practices for language access? Like I mentioned before, consider language needs early and always. always advertise the availability of language access services. This is really key, and this is one of my pet peeves that I've seen with a lot of agencies where whether it's a public notice or, for a meeting or a document review, language access services are usually listed somewhere near the bottom where, if a person is of limited English ability, they're not going to read to the top of the, to the end of the document. You want to see that statement up front and bold. So advertise your availability of language access services clearly and prominently and up toward the top of a document. So that's one of the things that's really key. The other thing is that if you're going to need people to contact your office to request language services, make sure that you make that very clearly, provide a time frame, and make sure that the person that is listed as a point of contact is bilingual. Also, use professional interpreters for simultaneous interpretation, as well as professional translators for written translations. Oftentimes, either because of lack of planning or because of lack of resources, folks delegate that person in your office who speaks Spanish or who speaks Tagalog to do that. First of all, we need to take a step back and understand that many of us are multilingual, and yes, we can communicate, we can converse. However, we all range in fluency levels. So it's not a good decision. It's not a good move to make when you're tasking your staff or colleagues to do so. Make the time to invest in interpretation and translation. And if not, there are other resources out there. You can also consult with community groups and other agencies that may be able to assist. Okay. Next slide, please. So last but not least, what I wanted to do is talk a little bit about our work, CaliPA's work with the Government Alliance on Race and Equity. Language access services is a top priority for CaliPA, and a cohort consisting of 6 boards, departments, and offices that comprise CaliPA is part of the Government Alliance on Race and Equity cohort. And the Government Alliance on Race and Equity, also known as GARE, is a national network of government working to achieve racial equity and advance opportunities for all. This cohort has developed and assembled a language access work group that has assessed the different services and policies and procedures that we have in place for language services. And we've drafted a draft practices document where we are hoping to take to the next level the ultimate goal of developing a CaliPA-wide language access policy that will help standardize the various types of language services we have across CaliPA. So that's something that we're really looking forward to in advancing in the next year. So I wanted to make sure to highlight that because our work has been incredible with working with racial equity issues and CaliPA as a whole. Next slide, please. So the last, I just wanted to share some resources on plain language. This was lifted from a training that I helped facilitate with the Department of Toxics for risk communication. And these are some of the resources that we list for that particular training. I'd be happy to provide you with additional information and resources regarding plain language and as well as some of the work that we've done on racial equity. Next slide, please. So this is my contact information. Again, I work for the State Water Board. My name is Marina Perez, and I'm most available during this time via email since I'm teleworking. So I want to take the time to thank you and let you know that we're available to answer questions and provide resources. Thank you.
Thank you, Marina. Thank you, Marina, and thank you, Mavish. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing the PowerPoint just so we can see your faces more. We have a good 5, maybe 6 minutes for questions. So let's see, Natalie, can we have you unmute yourself and you want to relay? I want to start with the questions that might have come from the webcast folks.
Hi, Sarah. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, we had a good question come in from Denise Price that I also posted in the chat. Oh, I'll start my video. And they wanted to know where to go to get a list of certified translators. And I actually responded to them through also just emailing her what was in the chat response, so I can list what I heard in the chat. Is that okay? Okay.
Yeah.
So Carlos, one of the Spanish interpreters, he is from Translang, and he said while there are several associations and websites, unfortunately there isn't a single reliable clearinghouse for translation and interpretation sources. Sometimes it's best to rely on recommendations from peers who have found success through partnering with the right language experts. Deldi posted a couple of links about Zoom language interpretation and their interpretation provided by independent contractors. Mavish, she listed some resources from the Language Justice Initiative, and that's justcommunities.org. Just is just-communities.org. And then another 3 orgs. One is cultural and language.net. Another one is languageworldservices.com, and then languageline.com. So if we could save this list somewhere, at least it's in the Gmail account that we're using for this conference, maybe we could send that out to folks after.
And the other piece of it, is really, I think, checking in with people who've used those services. I was working with the municipal government recently, and they've just switched vendors, right? So it's also might not be who you might have been partnering with an organization for a long time, but really paying attention to the evolving needs and how sophisticated you want your language access capability to be. And so they realized that the folks they were using were just, were not effective anymore. So really using, getting feedback, not only from other agencies, but also from either the frontline staff or your community members, right? So
that's a really great point, Mavaj. I think it's really important, given that this service benefits community members. I think it's really important to be able to tap into community providers and stakeholders to get their sense in terms of, which interpreters or which translators have been most effective to meet their needs. Also, I would really recommend that if you're looking for vendors, to really ask and talk to different agencies and get their take on what their services have been like. Every vendor is different. Some are more proactive and on it than others. And so I think it makes sense just to shop around and to ask.
I have something to add. And Marina, you probably have the most insights. So I've just worked in government for 2 years now, and understanding the contracting is like a lot. And so anything you want to share or advice about an RFP process where the contract people are completely disassociated from program people and the importance of a good RFP or scope of work and what could be done that gets it quality.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Yes, that's an excellent question, Sarah. I would really, really advocate for this. When you're doing RFPs or contracts, it's really critical to make sure that you have people at the table who know the ins and outs of language access and what that means, because there are certain aspects of a contractor that you need to put into, you need to incorporate into that contract. If you have people who are just familiar with contracts but don't know the intricacies and the importance of language access, you may be stuck with the contractor that may not be as fulfill your needs, or that, more importantly, those of the community's needs. So it's really important to have people who are knowledgeable writing those RFPs, reviewing those contracts, and even, if possible, interviewing some of those contractors.
All right, Natalie or Elizabeth or anyone else on our team, I think we have time for one more question if someone wants to raise one.
Yeah, there's one more question. So the question is, will the language access policy be publicly available to as a resource for other state agencies to use as a guide?
That's a really good question. You know, our information as a government agency would be public. We put it on our website. It'll take a while before we get there, but most definitely we will share that. I'd also be happy to speak with whoever has submitted the question and share some resources as well. So feel free to contact me. I'd be happy to speak with you further on that.
Okay.
I just want to add one thing to that. I think it's really important in terms of the policy. The other big piece, if I had to end with anything, is it has to be someone's job, right? You can't, like in any agency, whether it's a state or municipal, the idea of having someone in that RFP process implies that it shouldn't be added on to someone who happens to be bilingual and happens to be bicultural and is probably not getting paid enough to do that job. So I think if I had one last thing is make it someone's job.
Mm-hmm. That's a really good point, Mavash. We have in the Office of Public Participation, we take language access to be very important. And we actually have an in-house translator, a young lady named Mandy Roman, who's incredible. And she's provided such incredible insight in terms of what should be in part of a contract, what makes for a good interpreter and a good translator. She has a background in language, and she has been a professional translator for several years. So having that expertise on board is a tremendous help to us.
Great. Okay, so I am going to do our usual poll to find out if people felt like this one was, how beneficial this session was. Here we go. And then similar to our other sessions today, for those of you participating in both English and Spanish, we would like everyone who is on the Zoom platform to open their chat box and share one thing that was especially helpful, useful, beneficial, that was new, that you learned in this language access session. For those of you who are joining us by webcast, we would love to hear the same thing from you. Please use that email, engagewithus2020@gmail.com, and send in the one thing you especially want to elevate that was most useful or beneficial. So I'm going to leave this open for another minute, and while I do, I can't help but give a plug to Natalie, because Mavish and I both used to work with her. And I remember when you got certified as for translation or interpretation when we were working together. What was it, Natalie?
I actually don't remember what it was called, but at the state, you can get a little raise if you speak Spanish. And so I was able to do that. But to be honest, I used it more with you, Sarah, than I did Mavish, than I did it when I was at the state.
It's called bilingual pay.
Right, the bilingual pay.
Yeah. Okay, Mavish, last thought.
My last thought was make it someone's job. You know, I guess the other, so many last thoughts. The other last thought is, you know, we're in an environment where there's going to be a lot of fiscal and budgetary challenges, right? I mean, that's just the reality of where we are right now. Mm-hmm. And I do feel like it might be very easy for folks to be, this is not doable given the budget. And so I feel like, you know, it's worth taking a second, third look, because if you in fact invest, it's going to pay off and make things, your decisions more effective. In the, I won't even say long term, I would say in the medium term. And then the other piece of it is sometimes, you know, you might feel like you as an agency don't have the budget, but really look around and see what you might be able to borrow. We saw that happen with people asking Marina for the language access policy. So you don't have to recreate the wheel, and really take advantage of shared resources as well. So don't let this fiscal environment that we're entering into be a pause.
Okay, please don't be annoyed, but I just thought of one more thing I'd love for you to share because it's recent. And that has to do with, for those of us who are engaging with folks within, let's call it government. I'm thinking, can you give a little advice for when we're chatting with people about the importance with language access and they are really blowing us off, or they're really saying, whoever doesn't care, they aren't going to read it, or like whatever kind of way they're dismissive. And depending on your point of view, it can really get you emotionally when that happens as the practitioner. And can you talk a little bit about, I don't know, almost like self-care and how you handle that? 'Cause I know we've talked about that kind of stuff so much. Is that true?
Yes. And I think it's true for whether you're talking about language access, which I said was really just one pillar of equity, or it's about all of the other pillars of equity that are just as important. So I think one is really beyond sort of the practicalities of framing it in a way that's going to get heard. It really is about, the response is not against me personally, brown woman of color, but it's really about, what someone else's frame is and what the way they're used to doing work and the way we are holding people accountable, right? So I think it's that whole systemic piece of, this is what's going to be, so it's not about me and it's about really the system. So I think that's one piece of really centering that. And yet I also feel like and I think the environmental justice movement is a great example of how they've created a pathway for everyone to lead, right? So I think those two resonate.
Last 10 or 15 seconds, Marina, before we say goodbye. Anything you want to add on that?
Absolutely. Make language access a priority, not an afterthought.
Yeah.
I find myself being the sole person often advocating for language services. It should be coming from everybody, not the sole brown person in the room. So make it a priority, please.
Great. Thank you. Okay, we are going to take a 5-minute break and we will be back at 3:30 with our Indigenous Language Best Practices for Engagement panel. Marina, Mavish, thank you so much. This was absolutely lovely.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks.
Stay safe.
So it is 3:30 and we are starting our last panel for the day, day 2 of our online engagement conference, Building Our Skills Together. If you happen to just be joining us, my name is Sarah Rubin. I am with the Department of Conservation, and the Department of Conservation is part of the California Natural Resources Agency, which is one of the sponsors of this conference, along with Cal EPA. This afternoon's session is Indigenous Languages Best Practices for Engagement. We have 2 fantastic folks lined up for you today. Arsenio, we're so happy to see you, and our other panelist, Sonia, is going to be joining right in. Before I turn things over to Arsenio, I am going to just remind folks that we have Spanish language interpretation available, and that is available all 3 days of our conference. And we encourage you to try it out, even if you are English monolingual. We want to welcome you if you are joining through the Cal EPA webcast. We want you to participate in this session just as much as the folks who've joined us by Zoom. If you're on by Zoom, we encourage you to use our chat function and the Q&A function as we go to ask questions and share your thoughts. For those of you who are joining through the webcast, please use our email we have set for the conference to ask questions or to interact. And that is engagewithus2020@gmail.com. Okay, so Arsenio Lopez is the Executive Director of the Mixteco Indigenous Community Organizing Project. And I couldn't be more thrilled to have you. You are such a wealth of information. We are very lucky. Without further ado, we want to unmute yourself. It's your show.
Thank you so very much, Sarah, and thank you for the opportunity to share with you a little bit about, and with everyone, about our organization, which is Mixteco Indigena Community Organizing Project. Our mission is to support, organize, and empower the indigenous migrant communities in Central Coast of California. Can we go to the next? Before we move into the next slide, I just want to make sure that at some point people can have my contact information. They will have further information or questions. So I do make my cell phone available at 805-822-2418. They can also send me an email to my email address, arsenio.lopez@mixteco.org.
And also, I'll just mention that all the slides from today's sessions are already on the website for anybody to pick up anytime, and that has your contact information on it. And to do that, the easiest way is to go to resources.ca.gov, and we're the first image on the homepage, this conference.
Thank you. Can we go to the next slide, please? So just a little bit, I mean, I have a very few minutes to share, but in general, I would like to share that in Mexico, there's about 68 indigenous nations, more to the southern part of Mexico. So in California, there is about 120,000 indigenous farm workers, but not all indigenous migrant people that have been moving in California works in the agriculture industry. So the number may be greater than 120,000. Can we go to the next slide? So for me, it's also really important to remember for those agencies that at some point they do interact with indigenous migrant communities that come mostly from the Mexico country. One very important information that they should remember is always ask the individual if at the time they want to provide with language services or interpretation to those individuals, to always remember to ask the state from what that person is from, as well as from what community that person is from. On the later slide, I will share the information why this is important. It's just because often we just get information like, I need a Mixteco from the Mixteco Bajo, but it doesn't really mean anything for us, or a Mixteco Alto, because a person may be from Guerrero speaking Mixteco, so we need to still be able to match the interpreter based on communities. So three main information: what the state is that person from, and the village from that what village that person is from, and the language that that person speaks. So here's just some of the examples of the name of a community that we have identified in the county of Santa Barbara and Ventura. So usually the name of these communities starts with a saint name, followed by the last name with a fruit. For example, San Francisco Higos or San Martin Peras. Can we go to the next slide, please? So some of the barriers that we face as indigenous communities, usually, discrimination. Discrimination is being part of our, if I can say, of our lives. We have been constantly putting into just being indigenous people, being discriminated. And this often, lead to the insecurity and isolation. So there's a lot of questions when people interact with our communities. They always question themselves, like, why these people are so quiet, and why these people lack with a lot of self-confidence, and why these people, they don't really are social. And it's a very historical thing that we need to it's complex, and a few minutes will not help me to really help you to understand the history that we carry on discrimination. The big challenges, I will say, sometimes I do use the word barrier when I do refer that when our people speak their indigenous language, but if my personal view is not, it should not be a barrier. Us speaking our indigenous languages, moving around our America continent should not be a barrier. So, but it's when it comes to having access to services, it is a barrier. There is not direct translations. Often people, when are working with interpreters, indigenous language interpreters, they want the interpreters to repeat exactly what is being said in English or in Spanish to the indigenous language, but often there is not literal translations. And of course, when people are facing these difficulties, it increases stress, and it's a lot of frustration that you may see in our communities. Lack of cultural appropriate services. There's still a long way to go to really see the system where we want to see it for our communities. Still, there's a huge gap and a huge challenge in terms to really understand the culture of our communities and what is appropriate and what is not appropriate when it comes to provide services to our people. So one thing we are always recommending, to understand the indigenous culture and life experiences. Not all life experiences are the same. So do not put us all in one place. Like by understanding one family's life, it doesn't mean that you understand the life of other indigenous families. Often we see that there is providers that lose control. They don't really deliver their services in a very professional, and I might say that it's understandable, but we always need to remember to be providing this service in a very professional manner. There is systematic socioeconomic barriers, of course. Often our people, they don't have their own cars. They have to be looking for transportation. Public transportation is a huge problem. It's not as simple as say, can you please come to this appointment at this time? And you expect that person will be, at that time, because there might be a lot of challenges on their way to that appointment. Long work schedule and physical demands. A lot of our people work in the agriculture industry. They might be waking up at 3, 4 in the morning to make themselves, getting into their job at 6, 7 in the morning and leaving work around 3, 4, very exhausted, coming in their homes and be ready to make dinner for their families. So, and that is some weekly schedule is from 6 days a week, Monday to Saturday, sometimes Sundays to Fridays. So sometimes these office business hours don't really help our communities. Services hour is something that we need to consider to work on. The next slide, please.
Real quick, Arsenio, would you mind adding just, especially for people who maybe haven't traveled outside of the United States, could you say one other sentence about this issue of discrimination and how folks might come from a country where they also experience significant discrimination?
Yeah, so let's remind ourselves, right, that Native people, indigenous people had been here for thousands of years. So there's very intentional tactics and strategies to, I will say that in this way, to eliminate indigenous people from Mother Earth, from the world. So through that effort, there's a lot of discrimination in our own country, not allowing us to speak our own languages. We are being, there's a lot of prejudice and I forgot the other word, in terms with how do we look, the color of a skin, the height, how short, how tall you are, if you speak well Spanish or not, if you are educated or you're not educated, if you're, there's all these stereotypes about indigenous. Being an indigenous, you are being stereotyped to be a person with no intelligence, a person with not being civilized, not civilizations, not being able to live in this modern life. So we carry all these kind of discrimination, stereotypes before coming to these new countries. So this is you adding the new layers to that as well. So there's here some recommendations: increase culturally and linguistically appropriate services for I put it here, Mixtecos, indigenous in general. We strongly recommend to employ health outreach workers if part of your job is to do outreach to the indigenous communities. I've been doing this community work for the last 16 years. And I'm coming to conclusion that if you really want to make a real change in terms to reaching out to the indigenous people, you have to be able to be more flexible and be open in positions that it requires trilingual skills, you know, the indigenous language, Spanish and English. That's how I think it will be, you will be more competent to provide these services to the communities. Increase the number of interpreters in various indigenous variants. Again, it's not enough to say, I need a Mixteco interpreter or I need a Zapoteco interpreter. There's like 100 different variants only in the Mixteco language itself. Provide cultural and competency training to providing staff. Often I heard people saying, you know, I took these 2 hours training, cultural competency training. So I do know, I understand your culture, and it's a continuous, it's an ongoing learning effort that I think it takes time. Explore appropriate translation for legal services. Is related to, like, it's not literal. The interpretation, you cannot be literate to, you know, one word to another word. It more like describing things. So we need to be able to, how can we create, you know, this interpretation and these legal terms that's understandable for these communities. Next slide, please. A little bit about the Mixteco ourselves. Like in 2008, I felt forced because of what the need I saw on creating our own indigenous language services here in our organization. So we started training our own indigenous interpreters, and at the same time, we start contracting with agencies. One thing that I have identified that is very interesting is that there is translation and interpretation companies that may be working with the state directly, and they come to us, but they have not that cultural understanding about the need of interpreting, you know, in the indigenous languages. So they just come to us and say, I need a translation for this document, or I need the, you know, interpretation for this. So we train our interpreters. We don't really advocate, or we don't support this idea of using children's or family members as an interpreters. I know this is a big discussion right now about certification. Legally, there is not a certification for health interpreters. There are recommendations for an interpreter to be trained with at least 40 to 60 hours, but it's not like by law, there is not that certification. However, in the legal setting, the core, there is a core certification that an indigenous interpreter can take only if that indigenous interpreter speaks English. But most of our interpreters do not speak English. They are bilingually, their indigenous language and Spanish language. The pool of trilingual interpreters is very limited. And the numbers of certified core indigenous interpreters, I can count them with my finger, might be 4 or 5 interpreters throughout the state. So we see our interpreters as cultural brokers. We train our interpreters to at some point intervene during the interpretation, to say, you know, the interpreter would like to clarify this based on our culture. The interpreter would like to add this based on the culture. That's terminology as well. There's a lot of work and efforts around that, putting together and identify terminologies, health, legal terminologies. This is very important. It's very frustrating for providers when they interact with indigenous speakers sometimes. Why? Because they want our people to go to the point. That's how you speak probably in this culture. Like, tell me to this point. Don't go around. Don't tell me. I don't need this extra information. But one thing is, that's how we communicate. That's a way our communities do want to make sure that you really understand you have the whole story, the whole spectrum of of what exactly happens. And it may not take 1 minute or 2 or 5 minutes. It might take like 15, 20 minutes because people really want to tell you the story of any incidents of the case. So that's something that is a way of working with our communities. Next slide, please. So here are just some examples that school districts and other agencies had put it together in their effort to reach out or to serve the indigenous communities. So this is a middle school kind of a weekly report to their parents. They're gonna circle the happy face if the students are bringing their homeworks every day or in the week, and they're gonna put a pretty angry or sad face if the students are not completing the homework or at all, no homework or their behaviors. Teacher will put a very happy face if the students is really happy. So through the parenting meetings, also teachers provide information to their parents, like as soon as they receive an angry face on this report, that they should come to talk with them immediately. So that's part of the process also to inform parents how to read these type of materials. The next slide, please. So another effort is that we're working with the local law enforcement on helping them to interact with indigenous communities in our areas. They approve, or they are working with us on providing interpreters to people, that they committed some violation or some kind of issues. But at the same time, we want to make sure that our people carry this card, that by the time that they're being stopped by the law officer, that they show this card saying, I need a Mixteco interpreter. Instead of don't know how to communicate with the officer. Next slide, please. So that's pretty much it. So it's a pretty quick, some recommendations, but I'm here for more questions if you have more.
Thank you, Arsenio. That was so informative and helpful. Oh, my PowerPoint is horribly sensitive. Let me try again. So we're about to go to Sonia. Yes, okay. Sonia, you ready to jump in? You want to unmute yourself? You're on mute.
I'm trying to get in.
We hear you. We hear you.
Yeah, but okay. Is it okay? Do you see me? I don't see anybody.
We see you. No, we see you.
Oh, boy.
She's using her cell phone, so
okay.
Give her a minute.
Yeah, I have to move to cell phone because.
No problem. We're just so happy to have you.
Okay.
Go ahead and
my laptop and my computer doesn't have a camera.
That's okay.
Okay, you don't need to see me, right?
You look great.
Okay, thank you. I can't even see myself. Okay, so are you gonna record this or what?
Yes, it's all being recorded. You're gonna be famous.
Oh boy. Okay, I hope I could see myself from here. Wait, I'm using the phone.
You look good. It's a great lipstick color.
Oh boy. Okay.
Okay. So when you're ready, we are ready. And then once you're done with your presentation, we're going to go into a Q&A for both you and Arsenio.
Okay. Let me change the setting of this.
And while she's setting that up, I will mention that Sonia is a Tagalog interpreter at Language World Services, and she's going to be sharing some insights today from the Philippines, giving us a sense of the diversity of indigenous individuals within the Philippines as a background, to help us think about also, we've talked about Latin America, but now also in Asia. Or what gets lumped together is Asian Pacific Islanders. It's a horrifically overly broad grouping, in my opinion. Okay, Sonia, have we lost you?
Okay.
Okay, why don't you just go ahead with your audio? It's okay if we don't hear you. I mean, we don't.
Okay, that's good.
We just want to hear you.
Well, you hear me okay, right?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. I'll start. I am going to provide a few insights into the complexities of indigenous languages in the Philippines. But this is just one snapshot to help you think about the complexities that exist across Asia and the Pacific Islands. The Philippines has approximately 183 languages and dialects. 175 are indigenous. The Philippines has 8 major dialects or non-indigenous. Listed in the figure from the top to the bottom: Bicol, Cebuano, Hiligaynon, also called Ilonggo, Ilocano, which also called Iloco, Kapampangan, Pangasinan, Tagalog, and Waray. These are dialects differences within the language depending where you are from specifically. Not huge difference, but differences nonetheless. The Philippines has maintained multiple languages because of physical isolation. The Philippines has 7,107 islands. The language being taught all over Philippines is Filipino or Tagalog and English. Some of the struggles and challenges: too many languages and dialects, no direct translations, non-equivalent words to Philippine language or to English, language barriers within the country, more so outside the country or worldwide, inter-island cultural differences, and terminology. Same word, but different meaning depending where you came from. With insights or communication style, because of language barriers, Filipinos develop non-verbal communication skills. They use hand gestures, pursing of lips, raising of eyebrows, and their eyes to communicate. They have sharp intuitive sense for what is implied and not stated. Even their smiles have various meanings. A smile is not always meant to convey happiness or positive feeling, but can mask embarrassment, nervousness, and feelings of insecurity. If they do not want to respond, they just smile. When responding to a Filipino request or favor, Filipinos generally struggle with saying no or fear of hurting other people's feelings. Instead, they may convey by responding maybe, even if they actually mean no. Filipinos are generally shy, friendly, and hospitable. So for outreach or recommendations, we have to evaluate their nonverbal communication. Since there are so many dialects and languages, so you have to clarify what dialect they speak and which island. If speaking indigenous, ask what in non-indigenous language they can speak and understand. Although Filipino or Tagalog is the language commonly used to communicate to fellow Filipinos, be mindful that not all Filipinos speak Tagalog or English. Some indigenous prefer to speak or understand English better than Tagalog. So that way you have to make it clear which dialect they speak. But since the literacy of Filipino is high, there would always be somebody in the family or nearby or significant others who could communicate English or Tagalog. And the last but not the least, I would like to share the mission of Language World is to improve the quality of life for limited English proficient or LEP people by facilitating understanding across cultures and languages, and to provide training and opportunities to future bilingual leaders to leverage their expertise while maintaining a cultural and linguistic link to their heritage. And our vision, to be recognized leader in excellent cultural and linguistic services to Northern California businesses, institutions, government agencies, and consumers. To be the best private employer of highly qualified bilingual, bicultural professionals who desire to keep their respective communities. To promote wellness, cross-cultural understanding, and expand wealth in an increasingly complex and culturally diverse region. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonia. That was so helpful. And I'm seeing in the chat how much people have enjoyed that presentation. So we will now be able to move into Q&A. And actually, Arsenio, I wonder if something Sonia just mentioned, this term that often gets used, LEP, low English proficiency. Any insight?
Limited English proficiency.
Oh, pardon me. Limited English, okay. But I'm wondering, Arsenio, if you could speak, share some insights of, Marina talked about it too, that someone's skill set could really, or proficiency could be on a range. So how might, what advice do you have or insights do you have about like kind of the range where someone's comfort level might be with language?
So if I understand your question correctly, so you're, I think.
Want me to say it again? I'm sorry, I'm being obtuse.
Yeah.
Okay. What I'm getting at is that sometimes someone might know, like, say, a little bit of Spanish or a little bit of English.
I'm gonna, yeah.
Like they're getting 30%, but it's not enough. And
right.
Then people make assumptions, especially if you have a good accent, they assume you know more than you do.
Well, it happens to all of us. Like it happens to me, right? I do feel that I'm speaking English. I've been speaking this language for 16 years. I started learning the language in 2003. I went to school here. I went to the university. I've been exposing myself to these languages a lot. The English, that's what that's what I do here in the organization as well. But it's still, if you ask me to be in court for a very personal or, for any case, I was still gonna ask for a Spanish interpreter. So now you might say, well, your English sounds perfect, sounds amazing, because you're not gonna say the truth. It's still, I don't feel confident. Now imagine a person who, it happens to all, I think I will speak from my own kind of experience working with my communities. It happens to our communities all the time. When a person speaks well, like few sentences in Spanish, there is these assumptions that this person, no worries. All what I need to do is to speak with this person in a very slow manner. And they will understand me. No, they don't need a mistake interpreter. No worries, don't you worry. See, they got it perfectly. That's a huge problem. That's a mistake. What is a level of proficiency? If you ask to the person, I don't know, there's how to measure that when you're interacting with the clients. How are you gonna say this person understand 80, 90%? I think, on my own personal opinion, as soon as you realize that the person is having challenges to really follow the instructions, and that happens to me with a judge, because I will be just being real honest here with 175 participants, but they were asking me questions like in English, and I was very feeling strong, like, what? No, and the judge noticed that immediately. It's like, no, I need a Spanish interpreter here with this guy, because I want to make sure that this person understands. So I think many of us, just because we don't want to lose that time, and because we don't want to bother ourselves probably to go into that, or because we don't know that these Mixteco or indigenous interpreters are, and our agency has these contracts, we don't want to take that extra time to say, you know, I need to find an interpreter. So I don't know if I'm answering your question. I leverage too much on it, but I think we need to really be careful on this English limited proficiency or Spanish proficiency, or, you know, Mixteco. So because each individual is in a different level. A little bit more on something that I didn't share and it escapes to me. We need to be really careful with indigenous language speakers, because most of our languages are phonetic. We really need to remind ourselves, we really need to understand that indigenous people, yes, we did have a written system. We're not ignorant. We are a very smart civilization. We have contributed to this world a lot. But our written system is different system. It's hieroglyphics, it's codex, it's different books. And a lot of people, they don't know how to read and write. So I have received a lot of requests, and I need this translation. Just this phrase, just this paragraph to be a Mixteco language. Like, for who? Are you gonna provide this to a academic Mixteco person who's studying linguistics? That might be, you know, worth it for you to translate it. But if you're gonna provide it to the general Mixteco community, the general Zapoteco community, the Triqui community, I don't think you need to put a lot of efforts on putting the writing. It's better to invest on developing audio or developing videos, because that's what is gonna reach to the community that you want to reach out with that specific information. I have also been partnering, been working closely with developing pesticide materials. But, you know, there is being, many of these materials are written materials or visual materials, but I think it's important, but you need to put a little bit, a lot more intentionality on developing this other audio, because there's a lot of variants, and as what it was described by Sonia, it's a lot of different variants. And I don't know if I'm explaining myself by saying variants, you know, different dialects. Again, just in the Mixteco language is 100 different variants. We have identified just in the Ventura County, no less than 24 variants. That's where I'm coming from, the importance to really, really ask the person their state of origin, their communities, and the language that they speak.
Okay, thank you. Sonia, anything you want to add in before I go to our team to ask about questions from our participants? Okay.
Yes. I'll unmute Sonia, or no, she's
Okay.
unmuted now.
Okay.
Okay. I think I'm good.
Okay, so let me see. So Jessica, Abraham, Mandy, Veronica, anyone have anything you want to lift up from the chat or the Q&A or the Gmail address? And if not, I've got a question too, but I don't want to be at the front of the line because I'm on the screen.
No, as far as for the Spanish, we didn't get anybody this time. Thank you. No.
Yeah, and for the chat, there's nothing. There's some really great comments about how important it is to have a good interpreter and to think about who's in the room and some of those language barriers that people face.
Okay, well then I will go ahead and ask my question. So Arsenio, you might have I think Sonia, you could have insights into this too. Arsenio, given where your place as the executive director, you might have a broader experience with this, also from our prep call, I'm thinking about it, which has to do with contracting, state contracting or government contracting. So clearly, the way you explained that basically some kind of, let's say, big interpretation, big, I don't really know how big they are, but big enough that they have a contract with the state agency, is this coming to you to try to subcontract? And it's not necessarily appropriate on a number of levels. So say a state agency or local government wants to contract with you directly. What I'm thinking about is these requirements for like a gazillion dollars of different kind of insurance and stuff that often makes it very hard for a small nonprofit to be part of the contracting system. And maybe I'm wrong, but I'm just wondering what you might share as far as contracting.
Yeah, so I don't know if it's, I can't say right now as the organization I represent is that small. It's a medium size organization in the county. So we have putting in place a system and structures to be able to contract with state agencies and even with the own state. I think the challenge that we're having here is that there is this, and maybe, I'm sorry if I'm wrong, but this is my perception and my experience is that there is not really a trust between, I can't name, specific department, the specific agencies to the services that we do provide, or they don't really trust to the, or they don't know, or they don't trust to the abilities of our interpreters. And this is the reason why, because if they reach out to us to inquire for our services, and we do tell them, we do have a very limited numbers of trilinguals. It's mostly bilingual Spanish and Mixteco. So there is, again, interpreters and translation services agencies out there who are promoting themselves as, I have trilingual interpreters, I have Mixteco, English. So who these agencies gonna go with? They're gonna go to these agencies that really, they have a really good budget on their marketing, right? So, and at the end, who is that agency is coming to? They're coming with MICOP, then with our organization, because there's a very few number of organizations across the state. I can name it to you. Cielo is one of them in Los Angeles. And there's a MAYEP, which is another organization in San Francisco, and ourselves. And there's another one in Salinas. So there's like 4 or 5 of us who are providing these services. So these third vendors are reaching out to us because, with this urgency of they really want a trilingual, but then there's 2 problems there. There is not many trilinguals who is certified, quote unquote. Second, maybe your client who speaks Mixteco, Zapoteco, the trilingual interpreter that you have will not match with your client. So you only have a choice of getting this bilingual interpreter who is Spanish Mixteco for that specific client, for that specific communities. So I think there is still, yes, rooms, and there is still definitely opportunities for us to keep working on making sure that we're strengthening our collaboration with the state and be able to position ourselves to provide interpreter services directly with the state and don't have to go through third vendors. But still, I really need to understand the system, how it works. So the other thing, I before I forget, that it just came to my mind, it's that our population migrates. They move based on village. So let's say that in Ventura County, there is this variant of Mixteco. It's more probably that this community will be in Ventura County. And if we identify one variant of this other Mixteco, Zapoteco being in up north, California, it's more probably that there's gonna be more numbers of these specific variants there, because that's how we migrate, because we migrate by communities based village. Like my whole town is here in Ventura County, and there's another towns in Salinas or in Watsonville or in Sonoma County or in Washington State or in New York or in Virginia. So it's, for us doing this work day by day, we really have identified we have an idea what variance that is in what community. So that's when it comes, I think, with the importance to strengthen collaboration and partnership with you all, with the different organizations. And honestly, you know, it will be great if you contract with our Indigenous language services, but if not, we are here for community. So we're here to support you and to help you walk through to understand our communities and these areas and how, because our interest is to make sure that our communities are having access to your resources and your services.
Sonia, would you like to add in? Do you have any thoughts to share?
Hi, Sarah.
Hi.
Hi. Basically, what Gaspar was saying is yeah, that's true, challenging. But at some point, with my experience, I'm quite exposed to. I speak the major dialects, mostly a few of them, almost all. Then I speak a few indigenous. So I could communicate with those indigenous, but not all of them. Most of them, I could communicate better, and I could specify what dialects, where they're coming from, because sometimes the words have the same words but they different meanings. So I need to know where they're coming from. That way I could adjust myself and be able to communicate with them. But there are instances where my office would call and say, can you speak this dialect because immigration needs it or stuff. There are some indigenous that I would just say, no, I'm not comfortable with that kind of dialect, because as an interpreter, we were trained we're trained and certified. But I know my limitations, so I know the dialects that I could 100%, interpret or translate. But there are some that I understand, but I am not confident enough to translate as well. So I make it clear, if it's just simple communication, then I could do it. But if it's legal or medical, wherein it goes in depth to the terms, then I would know where to put my limitations and tell them I'm not going into that depth.
In our case here with the organization, in terms going back a little bit about how our program works. So our interpreters are not 24/7. We work based on scheduling interpreters. So when we do contract with agencies, they do need to send a request within the 24 hours minimum. If it's more, it's better for us. It gives us more time to find the right interpreter who matches to that clients that need the interpreter. So our system is not like that system that our interpreters are available, or our services available 24/7. Not that we don't want to. There's a lot of reasons. One of it is that even though we know that the need of more Mixteco speaker interpreter services is increasing more, but not to the level that our interpreters will only be sustain their families by just doing interpretation. They do have part-time, they have full-time jobs, and they only make themselves available for very specific hours in the week or very specific hours through days of the week. So our program has about 20 different interpreters, but not all of them is there, waiting for calls. So that when it comes to the importance of when they work with us is by scheduling interpreters. We have one interpreter coordinator who receives these requests, and then that coordinator will schedule that interpreter. Before COVID-19, we were not encouraging either Zoom interpretation or telephonic interpretation because we believe that it's create more barrier to our indigenous communities. It's different to be in person, in person on the site interpretation, because already if I do speak one variant, but my variant is matched to these clients, be on site will minimize that challenge of communication. It will be more effective communication. But COVID has transformed all of us. So we have to be able to put ourselves also flexible. We still not have the capability to do a Zoom interpretation. We're doing mostly phone interpretation. But again, we're still using these scheduling interpretations as well. So somebody asked on the chat about the 68 indigenous nations in Mexico. If I understand correctly, the question, how these people communicate among themselves. Well, right now, after 500 years of invasion to Mexico, and the Spanish language being imposed on indigenous people, so the most common language for us to communicate is in Spanish. And that's when it comes to the social isolation, when it comes to the barrier, to the discrimination, to the exclusion of indigenous people in Mexico from their own Mexican government. And that's a whole other stories, that when it comes that our people don't have had access to the basic human rights such as education. And that's when you come to interact with indigenous people, they might not know how to read and write. Not that they didn't want to, it's because education is being a privilege to our indigenous lives in Mexico.
Thank you. So we are gonna wrap up in just a moment or two. Arsen, you have one other question, if you don't mind, because I'm thinking about how so many people, at least who work for state and local government, they often do have Spanish to English interpretation happening at a meeting. And you've been very articulate about how there typically might be more interpreters, for example, Mixteco to Spanish versus trilingual. So can you explain for someone who's never seen it before how it would work to have, let's pretend it's not COVID for the sake of explaining it. You're in the meeting. Can you explain how it would work where you've got one interpreter doing English to Spanish and the other Spanish to Mixteco?
If it's gonna be a simultaneous interpretation, so there will be an English Spanish interpreter and the Mixteco Spanish interpreter. So the Mixteco Spanish interpreter will have the headset that will be listening to the English Spanish interpretation. The Mixteco interpreter will be listening in Spanish and will be, translating or and Mixteco using two different channels and the headsets. That is in the community meetings, community forums. It's been done. And it's been working just fine. I think when it comes to, how do you call it, consecutive interpretation is when it requires additional skills. It requires an agreement between the Mixteco, the Spanish English interpreter with the Mixteco Spanish interpreter. They have to plan it, be in agreement, who's gonna speak first, and how they're gonna communicate, how they're gonna be, asking for clarification, something that is not understanding. So it's just a dynamic of working out. And it's, I think at the beginning, it might sound pretty challengeable, but all what we have heard lately, after English and Spanish interpreters interact with the Mixteco Spanish interpreters, it's just they work fine, and providers really feel appreciative to be able to communicate with their clients. So it's just a matter of, it need that extra effort, I will say, and that extra willingness to make a difference in the life of the patient or the client, whatever you want to call it.
Thank you, that's so helpful. So if you don't mind, I'm gonna just reiterate one piece of what you said, because I know there's some out there watching through the webcast or on Zoom who maybe haven't even been to meetings where there's Spanish interpretation. So just in case, for the last piece you were talking about, I want to also double check I'm getting it right. So let's pretend At a point in the meeting, there's a public comment period and a person comes to the microphone and then they want to speak in Mixteco. So what is going to happen? Let's pretend it's like a 3-minute at the microphone. We're talking then about 9 minutes because we're going to first, let's say, do the first 2 sentences in Mixteco. Then the interpreter from your organization is going to go Mixteco to Spanish out loud. And then, because we're doing it at the microphone, not through the headsets, and then the third person would say Spanish to English. Is that correct?
You explained it very complex.
Is that too complicated?
Yeah, a little bit. Can you explain it one more time? I kind of like didn't follow you.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm trying to have everyone understand if a person who's most comfortable in Mixteco is talking into the microphone at the meeting, they're going to hear from the Spanish interpreter will say it out loud and then the English, correct?
Well, first, if the person will go on the mic will speak in Mixteco. Then the Spanish Mixteco person, interpreter will speak in Spanish. And then the English Spanish interpreter will speak in English.
Okay,
so
that's fine.
the message will be in 3 languages.
Yeah.
If it's gonna be like, let's say a public meeting and the person wants to do something, wants to speak for 1 or 2 minutes in Mixteco.
Right. Perfect. That's exactly what I thought.
Yeah.
Okay. Go ahead.
Sarah, we do have a question from the Q&A.
Okay, let's do one more, then we'll wrap up to get ready for our closing. Go ahead.
So Lori had a really great question about holding public meetings and how to know when communities have concerns. So she spoke primarily about state projects or other decisions being made. And a lot of times we know that engagement is required by regulations, but it's not as effective as it could be. So she wants to know how to reach out to people and really understand if they're interested in the project or they do have any concerns prior to doing all of that engagement.
There's 2 experiences there. One is that they reach out, an agency reach out to us like 4 days before the event or before the public hearings or whatever. So 4 days for us is not enough to reach out and to inform communities. And I think I'm not answering the way I want to answer it. So I think first it needs to be a list of resources of who has that trust with that specific communities. Like I'm wondering organizations like us, for example, you want to reach out to the Mixteco communities in Santa Barbara County or Ventura County, you reach out to us ahead of time and say, I want to reach out to your communities because this is what it's going on. So in our case, we have a community radio station. We do have a social media, Facebook pages, 9,000 followers, people that interest, engage. Because when people are informed and they really fully understand what's going on and what is that meeting or that event is going to be about, and how that is impacting them and their families, I think is when people engage. Because often you do your outreach and provide the outreach mostly in flyers and there's these important hearings, but people don't really get in it. What is that going to be about? So yes, you have your Mixteco interpreter at the public event or hearing or whatsoever, but if people don't really understand what is going on, will not be there. I don't know if that's part of the question. So, and it's before of that event, I think it should be some level of engagement to that communities, and not only engagement, but also like that is with education and information that really they understand. And that's something that we do as a community-based organizations, and I'm sure in Los Angeles, Cielo will do the same, and in San Francisco, Majeb will be the same. I think it's a matter of understanding who are these organizations working with these communities.
Wonderful. Okay, we are almost to the bottom of the hour. Sonia, Arsenio, I can't thank you enough. This was so informative. We're incredibly grateful for your time and your insights and the work you do, which is so important. So thank you. I'm going to go ahead and click to the next slide. Wonderful. All right. Do we want to bring up Joaquin's video? I'm over the moon that we have Joaquin Esquivel, Chair of the State Water Resource Control Board, to give us our closing remarks and to go over tomorrow.
Hello, Sarah. Thank you. Really appreciate the invitation to join in a small part what's been, I know, an incredible couple of days. I've been fortunate to tune in here and again in the last 2 days. Yesterday, we did have a board meeting at the state board, and so I wasn't able to tune in as much, but know that it's been an incredible time and certainly a needed time. You know, as I reflect on some of the panels, but also certainly the time and place we find ourselves, given the civil unrest, the challenges, the societal challenges that we continue to need to confront, given the issues of racism, but other long-standing institutional struggles, and the need for greater engagement with communities, particularly from agencies, and continuing to ensure that our decisions as government entities, our choices, and ultimately this collective space that we have as a society and as a community is reflected from the least and to the greatest of us insofar as means and ability to engage. And certainly at the State Water Board, where we have purview over administration of water rights in the state of California, water quality as well, but also drinking water, where for the last year we've been standing up the Safe and Affordable program, which is meant to ensure that all Californians have access to clean and safe drinking water. These are generational challenges that we have before us. And again, I think that we as state agencies and institutions will continue to need to better engage with communities, better ensure that voices are being risen up, and that we're synthesizing together the communities and understanding the communities that we want to build with one another, recognizing the incredible challenges that we have to face, but also the arc of those challenges. And so, you know, we at the board have been, like many of you as state agencies, and then those of you who engage with us, everyone out there, adjusting these last 2 months. And then the events of the last week, I think certainly further emphasize this space that we have. Today, we really focused on a lot of specific tools that can help, particularly with barriers to language, as we just heard from Arsenio, but then also ways that agencies are trying to be innovative in engaging with communities, with people. Tomorrow, it will be about the opportunities, I think, that we all recognize that the COVID-19 response has provided us as well. I think you see that here in the fact that we've had to pull together this event on this platform on Zoom. There is, you know, for us at the State Water Board, particularly even, we were quick to try to transition our state board meetings, which happen twice a month. We have to meet in public in order to conduct the board's work. The board does all of its work in public in a transparent way. We are subject to Bagley-Keene and Brown Act considerations on how it is that we vote. And like many agencies out there, had to quickly transition to a virtual space that I think has democratized our ability to engage communities, to lower the barrier when it comes to the cost that would otherwise it would be a burden upon an individual to fly to Sacramento, to appear before the state board, to discuss a drinking water challenge or otherwise. And here with this platform, instead, that cost is brought down, but it unearths other barriers, as we know, barriers around access to broadband. And again, we start to hit at some of the real fundamental discussions that we're having as a society now around how we continue to create that just California that I know the governor is committed to, that we all as members and public servants of this administration are committed to. And it's been emblematic these last days, the discussions here, the need and necessity to continue to best represent our communities, that we can only govern best when we are representing our communities. And it means we have to actively discuss it, actively develop resources to do it, and have these space for these discussions, but then also the follow-on discussions. And so tomorrow, again, we'll be able to shift a bit in our space here and talk about how the COVID-19 response is going to provide these future opportunities, what the space looks like. And we're committed, certainly at the State Water Resources Control Board. I personally am committed at the board to making sure that we do use this opportunity to acknowledge the shortcomings of all of us often, and recommit to building a stronger community that is, again, best reflective of the shared values that I'm very certain is here in this state. I've seen represented in so much of our work, and just really, again, thank you for letting me say a few words. I don't want to belabor too much. I know folks have been here for a while today, and there's still tomorrow to go. So just really want to thank you for the opportunity to say a few words, and look forward to further engagement. We have a few specific things coming up. Science fair, data symposium at the end of June rather. The Safe and Affordable program that I mentioned, we continue to implement, and there will be an advisory committee meeting, a public advisory committee meeting, which we've held a couple of times now. And I know you all heard from Jessica Bean yesterday. And so look forward to those specific opportunities to engage with the board. Come before our board on board meetings if you would like. We have, I think there's a way that, again, we as government agencies can, public servants can continue to recommit to the shared space and decision making that best lets us make our best decisions. And that at the very foundation is about ensuring all voices contribute to that discourse, that dialogue, whether it's about your clean water, your clean air, or any of the other functions that we collectively have said, we who govern ourselves, that's, again, government of, by, and for the people. And again, these platforms, these discussions, these resources are what specifically build our capacity as state and public agencies to do this work. So thank you all for your continued engagement work. I know this is between the Resources Agency and Cali, PA, all of the boards, departments, and organizations, the BDOs. It's an incredible, dynamic, and diverse set of state agencies, and a real commitment, I know, from Secretary Crowfoot to Secretary Blumenfeld and all the way down amongst us all. So thanks again, I appreciate it. Any other, I hate to just drop in and just.
No, it's thrilled.
Anything, Sarah, I don't know, I feel like I'm open for some dialogue as well. I don't mean to.
Okay. Well, so
folks, I'm glad to chat.
Cool. Okay. So first of all, this is perfect. We're thrilled you're here, and your remarks are just right, and I'm very grateful. I forgot to do our little poll about how people enjoyed the Indigenous language session. So I'm going to go ahead, if you don't mind, and I'm going to launch that poll.
Yes, please do that.
And then I'm going to ask, and everybody, if you want, you can move the little box that's a poll that comes right in the middle of poor Joaquin's face. You can move to the side. That's the first thing I do, so I don't feel like I'm being rude to him digitally. And then if you want to open up your chat box, we are very eager to have these key takeaways we've been gathering. What's one key takeaway that you have from the Indigenous language session? And I don't know if you feel like I'm putting you on the spot too much, Joaquin, but I'm wondering if you have a takeaway from that Indigenous, I don't know how much of it you caught, but if you have something you'd want to share.
Just that it's really important, speaking about the variants and dialects that you might encounter, to have somebody, have a resource, and I know there was some discussion in there about how best to contract for those sorts of services, how to work them in ways that really don't reinvent the wheel, but allow us to lean in best on existing work. And I feel that it comes from understanding first the community, and you really need somebody to help suss that out. I mean, otherwise you're not aware of necessarily the variants, both in Mixteco that might be there, but also the other languages. And it's hard because certainly as an implementing agency, I understand that cost certainly comes in, and having somebody on staff that is able to provide that whole variety of languages on call for whatever event it may be is hard. And so, and it doesn't really exist. And so the need is then to lean on these organizations that do have that expertise. But I think to Arsenio's point, it does require some thought from the state agency itself to say, what is a certain, what potentially, who do we need to call in, give the time to build in identification, and then the scheduling that it takes to have certain resources brought to a specific meeting. So, and that takes time, and I can understand that as well. And so, how do we best, facilitate those services at the least, but ultimately will take cost and is about resources, is the question.
Yeah, I'm thinking the same stuff. So I'm going to turn to Jessica, Mandy, Veronica. Anyone have a question or anything that's coming through the chat that they want to lift up?
There's no questions, just a lot of people are really sharing that they learned a lot during this session, and that we need to do a better job at community engagement and what it looks like and when we're beginning to engage with communities. And the other piece of that is really understanding that California is very diverse, and there's so many different language groups throughout California that we need to think about.
Yeah. So Joaquin, one thing I'm thinking about is Adriana on your staff. I'm such a big fan of hers. I happened to be in I think it was a 3-day training together with her, and she is amazing. And I wonder, for those who don't know about her or her role, if you might want to mention what you all are doing.
Thank you for that, gladly. We at the board are very fortunate to have had an Office of Public Participation for a good while, actually. And Gita, the former head of that office, was retiring. And with the Safe and Affordable program coming to the board, we also had a significant increase in our staffing as well on the Office of Public Participation. Understanding that community engagement is a key need, particularly if we were going to be successful in ensuring that these smaller systems in the disadvantaged communities are addressed. And it requires, as we know, particularly with communities who need additional technical resources and otherwise to bridge that. And so we were incredibly fortunate to have Adriana come in, because it's been such a critical time for the development and growth of the Office of Public Participation, as literally it is doubled, tripled, I think, in size from just a year ago. But it is, and this is what I'm heartened most about, really rooted in a deep acknowledgement from the State Water Resources Control Board that you need to have a specific place and space where you build the muscles to engage with communities, to actively prepare and have a space to best engage with communities. And the boards, we're fortunate because we're very public entities. At the State Water Board, we're composed of a 5-member board. We have 9 regional water quality control boards. All of those boards have 7 members. And so all together, 60 plus individuals have a very public accountability, because we're appointed by the governor, and our workings are again in public. And so that office, Adriana and her expertise coming to us from the community organizing community, having those skills and then furthering them for us at the board, we've been just incredibly blessed. And she's definitely one of our rock stars. So I'm glad you see what we definitely saw, and hopefully no one out there can pay her more, because she better not. Don't speak so well of.
Like, she was an amazing hire. Okay, can I give you one more compliment?
Of course, thank you.
Well, I know that she did a multi-day training about engagement online with Kaylin McGee, I used to work at the Center for Collaborative Policy, and Kaylin used to work there. And when state folks are investing in quality training, I get this like very geeky, warm in my heart feeling that should be embarrassing. But when I found out about that and I got to see the materials, I was like, yes, so psyched. So great you're investing in your own people, and it's exactly what we need.
I really appreciate that. Again, I think we're just very fortunate to have a lot of support up and down the administration for so much of the work that the Safe and Affordable program is doing. That again, if you look at the landscape and you see that there are a number of ways that we haven't lived up, perhaps to an ideal that we've all assumed we had. Certainly, the fact that 1 million Californians don't have access to clean and safe drinking water is one of those things that you would think, no, that's not something that our society is still part of or is still there. And I think that that's true for a number of different things out there. And I think that this space really is about recommitting ourselves to what it means to again have a shared prosperous future. And I think we need to all continue to contribute to building that. And I think this space is soon about building, as well as acknowledging the challenges that are there to begin with.
Yeah, well said. Okay, well, anything else you want to say before we wrap up and end our Zoom meeting?
Other than if there's any questions or thoughts, I'm out here. The work of a board chair is very strange to begin with at the board. I'm not the executive director. I'm not the amazing people that actually implement our programs on a daily basis. But always welcome to hear from folks. We're trying to do our best in an interesting space, and I know that is what brings us all here to begin with. And the number of people that have continued to tune in now the second day, and that we will have on a third day of programming, and that there were 3 days of programming. Just really appreciate the real work that went on to even bring this together. So acknowledge you, Sarah, and Yana, and everybody across all the many agencies that have pulled together to have this discussion, to create this space, and to just emphasize it. I just fortunate to do whatever small part. I just came in here, whatever. Yeah, I'm hopefully helpful, and
we are
around. So consider me an ally.
Great. Well, we're incredibly grateful to your team. I mean, you really have some serious rock stars, and I think you should worry, because you don't want to lose them.
You need to. It's fine. We're an average agency.
Okay, I think I'm getting too silly. It's to the end of the day. Okay, team, anyone want to raise anything up before we say thank you and goodbye? All right, hearing none. Thank you so much. Have a good afternoon. And
Thanks, everyone. Be well. Thank you, Sarah. Take care.
Thank you. Ciao.